invite you to the Carson Consolidated Municipal Notice of Growth Management Commission and Planning Commission. I'd like to call the Growth Management Commission to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Chair Preston, Vice Chair Lloyd, Commissioner Borders, Commissioner DeChristopher, Commissioner Cron,
Here.
Commissioner Kilgore,
Present.
Commissioner Perry.
Here.
A quorum's present.
See. We are now opening for public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of this public body. We ask that you limit your time to 3 minutes. And would anybody like to, and when you come up, please sign in, and we need a sign-in sheet. Thank you. And please state your name, spell it for the clerk, and then your 3 minutes will begin. Is anyone here for public comment? Okay, seeing none, I would like to ask for a approval of the minutes of the December 2022 Growth Management meeting.
Madam Chairman, I'll move we accept those minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Borders. You have a second? Commissioner Kilgore seconds. Thank you. Okay, meeting items. Whoop. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't ever want to vote on the minutes. Okay. I'd like to vote on approval of minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nay?
I'd like to abstain. I was not here for that particular meeting.
And Commissioner DeChristopher would like to abstain.
Abstain. I was not here.
The 4 remaining is a quorum, and it is approved. Thank you. Okay. Now, meeting items. 6A for possible action and discussion and possible action regarding recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for a resolution establishing the maximum number of residential building permits, allocations under Chapter 18.12, the Growth Management Ordinance of the Carson City Municipal Code, CCMC, for the years 2024 and 2025, estimating the maximum number of residential building units for the years of 2026 and 2027, establishing the number of building permit allocations within the development and general property owner categories, and establishing a maximum average daily water usage for commercial and industrial building permits as a threshold for Growth Management Commission review. Hope Sullivan, please. And
Right here.
I'm sorry, you're just over there.
I moved. Okay, first I'd like to make some introductions. You'll recall that when you knew this was coming up, you requested that all the agencies who would be involved in this conversation attend the meeting, and they're here. So we have our Deputy Fire Chief Lowe present, Public Works Director Darren Schultz, Deputy Public Works Director Dan Stuckey, Parks Director Jen Budge, Health and Human Services Director Nikki Aker, Wastewater Manager Andy Hummel, Water Manager Eddie Quaglieri, and Operations Manager Rick Cooley are all present. Also, we have our school superintendent here, Andrew Fueling, which is really exciting. Chuck Borders will remember that it was probably 5 years ago, when he and I both started. Every single project, we're talking about the schools and the impact on the schools. And we really started working closely with AJ when he was the business manager. And it's really been a partnership that you don't see in public a lot, but there's been really a lot of cooperation behind the scenes. So really grateful he's joining us, and he's going to present on student populations and sort of the impact of growth. I will tell you for him that he does need to leave after his presentation. He has a high school graduation over at Pioneer High School. So those are the logistics. So I'll make some opening remarks. I'll then turn it over to the school superintendent, and then Andy Hummel will give an overview on the wastewater treatment or the overall system, and Eddie Quaglieri will speak about the water system, and then we'll talk about growth management. So today you're here to essentially do three things. You're here to identify the number of building permits that will be made, or to recommend to the Board of Supervisors, the number of building permits that will be made available in 2024 and 2025, and to estimate the number to be made available in 2026 and 2027. You're also being asked to establish the distribution of the total building permit entitlements to be made available in the general property owner category and the development project, which is 31 units or more category. And you're being asked to establish the maximum average daily water usage for commercial and industrial building permits as a threshold for Growth Management Commission review. By way of background, the Growth Management Ordinance was originally implemented in the late 1970s in response to a moratorium by the state Division of Water Resources on new subdivisions in Carson City due to the water and wastewater capacity issues. The program was developed in cooperation with the state to address its concerns. Carson City Municipal Code, Chapter 1812 of the Growth Management Ordinance explains the purpose of the Growth Management Ordinance, and it talks about that we need input from the school district, Public Works, Sheriff's Office here? I didn't see them. They may come. Fire Department, Health and Human Services, and Parks and Rec. So we have all those people here for the ordinance. So I want to talk about what's been happening.
Oh,
Yes?
we're not, our screens are dead.
Okay, if somebody, I'm going to keep going, and if somebody can look into the commissioner's screens. Okay. So if we look at 5 years of housing starts.
Laptop too.
If we look at, I'm going to keep going. If we look at 5 years of housing starts data, what we'll see is that if we look at 2018 to 2022 is 5 complete years of data. 2023 is a partial year of data. So you'll see that in 2018, we had the Carson Hills apartments. So we had a lot, 391 multifamily. They weren't all Carson Hills, but that's a big number. And all of those allocations, growth management allocations, were issued in 2018. More recently, in 2022, we had Marlette Apartments, which are the apartments under construction on Lil Lane. So they obtained their building permits, so that's a pretty big number. In the intervening years, you didn't see big numbers under multifamily, which is why your totals there are pretty high. The single family, in my estimation, has stayed pretty steady, although a pretty significant dip in 2022. And I think that was probably a supply chain issue and a labor availability issue. In 2019, Public Works built a parcel-based model to analyze build-out potential. Based on that model, Carson City has, whoops, wrong thing. Oh, we can look at this one. The Growth Management Residential Allocation History. Okay, the white is the number of permits that were issued. The black line is the available allocations. So you can see in the last 25 years, we really haven't come close to the number of allocations. Residential permits by type, and again, looking historically, you'll see the multifamily, those high numbers with Marlette Apartments and Carson Hills Apartments. Otherwise, the single-family detached has stayed fairly steady. Now going to Public Works parcel-based model. Based on this model, Carson City has 24,464 existing residential units. Assuming all currently approved developments are completed at the approved density and all land designated for residential use are developed or redeveloped to the maximum density, an additional 8,384 residential units could be developed for a total of 32,848 residential units. Using 2.32 residents per unit, which is what the 2020 census told us we had for a household size, that would result in 76,207 people. I'll note that between 2010 and 2020, our household size dropped. from, it was, I think, 2.54 to 2.32. It could potentially drop, it could potentially increase, and those numbers would change since the household size is a function of this number. Per the state demographer, the city's population as of July 1, 2022 was 58,314. Per the state demographer's projections, the population will grow by 0.7% each year for the next 5 years. Typically at this meeting, we provide you with housing sale data that we obtain from our assessor's office. Per the assessor's data that they've collected, the median price of a single-family home in 2022 was $520,000. In calendar year 2022, there were 681 home sales, down from 981 in 2021. I think we all remember in 2022 a lack of inventory, and that was a big discussion. This bar chart shows you that. In 2006, our current methodology for growth management, which was to allow for a 3% growth rate, was established, and that's been the methodology that's been utilized ever since. Utilizing this methodology, I would recommend that in 2024, we make available 765 allocations. In 2025, 788 allocations. In 2026, 811 allocations. In 2027, 834 allocations. I've had some questions as to why we're committed to this 3% growth rate. And if we go back to that other chart I showed you where the actual housing starts were far less than the amount of allocations available, I actually think there's not a downside to continuing this methodology. The market's not even getting us close to this 3% growth at this point. But one thing we may want to consider is, should we start getting close to the 3% and we think we're not going to be able to accommodate the demand, we may want to look at a distribution geographically within the city and see where there's more capacity in the city, and you're going to hear from the school too, so they can consider where are the students, where's the growth, as opposed to concentrating the growth in just one single part of the city. But at this point, I don't think we have to have that conversation. It's just something to think about. The other part of growth management is the commercial and industrial growth management reviews. Right now, if a commercial or industrial user will use more than 10,000 gallons per day, 15,000 gallons per day, it needs to come to the Growth Management Commission for permission. This commission had asked Public Works to analyze the commercial and industrial users to determine if 15,000 seemed like the right number. They had to wait to get through COVID because nobody was going to work, and COVID just had kind of messed up their model. But they did get to a point where they were able to complete that analysis, and based on that analysis, they found that 10% of the high water users are using, or highest water users, I should say, are using in excess of 10,000 gallons per day. So the Public Works Director is recommending that the threshold be modified from 15,000 gallons per day to 10,000 gallons per day. You'll also recall a couple of years ago, 2021, we talked for the first time about having criteria for when you decide to allow for a large water user to have the water allocation, at that time greater than 15,000 gallons per day. In doing that, we came up with some criteria, and the board included that criteria in resolution number 2021-R-23. And what it says is that the Growth Management Commission must first find that the use utilizes water conservation measures and techniques. If you can't find that, you stop, and you can't get to yes. If you can find that finding, then you then have to find that the use will promote health, welfare, safety, or quality of life, or create quality jobs, or promote recreation and tourism. And if both of the findings are made, then you can approve the water allocation, the building permit. So I am recommending that we continue to include that criteria in the resolution. So that was just a brief overview. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrew Fueling, the Superintendent of Schools, for his presentation. And then we'll have Andy Hummel and Eddie Quaglieri come up with their presentation.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm AJ. You don't need to call me Andrew. But thank you, Hope. And I just want to reiterate the relationship that we have had with Hope's group and Hope over these last years has been exceptional, and just really appreciate the communication that exists between the district and Hope's office. The presentation that I have here, I actually just gave this exact same presentation to the Board of Trustees for the school district less than a month ago, I believe. We recently had a third party that specializes in doing enrollment projections finish their final report for us, so I gave that information to our trustees. And so it was perfect timing when Hope said, hey, we need to know a little bit more about the schools to come right here and give you some of that same information. So hopefully you'll find this interesting and helpful. It's a rather long presentation, but I don't plan on going through the whole thing. I know you have a lot going on here this evening, but I'll try to hit the highlights and some of the important variables that are considered in this. And you can ask me any questions you have thereafter, and of course you could always follow up after and ask them. So this is just a little recent history of enrollments we're seeing in the school district. So at the top, you have all the elementary schools, and I'll just note Pioneer is thrown in there, and that's usually we don't think of Pioneer as an elementary school. 2 years ago, when we had a lot of students doing distance education, basically online education as we were making our way through COVID, we offered that and made that a part of Pioneer, actually changed the name to Pioneer Academy. But you can see there that there's really not that many students that have taken advantage of that. But you can see then the elementary numbers. And so I went back to 15, 16. That was shortly after I arrived. 18, 19, 19, 20. So 19, 20 is kind of the high, the 18, 19, 19, 20 are kind of the high water marks. And then we have dropped since then. The middle schools, the same thing. You may remember that we have done an expansion onto the back of Eagle Valley Middle School to increase the capacity there. That very much is because of the numbers you see for Carson Middle School. They neared 1,300 students in the 1920 school year. So we did that addition on Eagle Valley, and now in this current year, you can see they're much more balanced numbers, although the overall middle school enrollment has also dropped. As some of these smaller elementary classes have moved up, we're starting to see them now moving into the middle school, so that's why you're seeing some smaller numbers there. Carson High at 2,300, over 2,300 this year, started just shy of 2,300 students, so their numbers haven't really changed. And what's interesting is even before COVID, if you looked at the overall enrollment of the district, in the elementary schools, we were seeing generally smaller and smaller classes coming in. The largest classes we have had in the district for some time have been at the middle school and high school level. At the high school, really like grades 8 through 11, I'll say, our average class size is over 600. When you get down to grades 5 through 8, our average class size is in like the 550 to 580 range. And then when you get to fourth grade down to kindergarten, the average class size is about 475 to about 510. So as you get younger and younger, we are seeing fewer and fewer kids coming into the district. I'll also note Carson High School, although 2,300 is a large number, and just 2 years ago, that was the largest high school in northern Nevada. It isn't any longer. North Valleys and Spanish Springs up in Reno are now larger. Back in 2003, I believe was the high point for the district. We had over 8,000 students in the district at that time, and Carson High School was about 2,600 students. So we have had higher points in the school. So the primary variables that are used in determining enrollment projections, first is births. So this company is finding out how many births are happening in the area, in the zip code. And they look at the relationship then between births and then 5 years later, how many kindergartners you have. And they look at that over time. Mobility factors, that's simply, in my finance world, we had the term was called cohort survival rate. And it's really just looking at, so how many kids do you have in first grade? And then next year, how many of those first graders became second graders? And then the year after, how many of those second graders became third graders? How many of them are surviving year to year in the schools? And the last one is the yield factors. And so they also, I actually don't know if they call Hope's office, I would assume so, but they are getting all the information on every development that is happening in the city that's been approved. What is the estimated time to build out? How many units will there be? What types of units will there be? And they look at current or more recent construction that has happened, and they look at the yield, the number of students we're getting out of those new places that are online now. And so those are the three major pieces that they look at. First, for births, if you look at that chart more so on the right, the third column, it just says Carson City in the column heading. And you can see the number of births going back to 2008 was at 684. And it has trended downward since, right? So now we're at, for the current kindergarten class, there were 584 births. I just added in, if you go back on the far left part of that screen, you can see the births going back to 2001. And you can see they were well into the 700s, 1 year, well over 800. And so that downward trend has been happening kind of since that high point for the school district in terms of enrollment, but also in terms of what we're seeing with births in the city, and then those numbers ultimately translating into kindergartners in the district. Next, it just shows the relationship between the number of births and then the number of kindergartners. So the blue line is the number of births in the city. And then the blue line then is 5 years later, how many of those kiddos became kindergartners. And one of the things that they noted, and they've seen this, they work with districts, a lot of districts in the western United States and then also in Texas. And they are seeing this trend nationally with all those districts they work with in these enrollments, that while there used to be a closer correlation between the number of births in a city and then the number of kindergartners that would come out of that, they're seeing a larger chasm, I guess, between those as you get into the 2020 school year, 2021 school year, and 2022 school year. This is, I mentioned that they look at the trends over time for when you have a group of kindergartners, how many of them make it to first grade? And then how many of those first graders make it to second grade? And so this is looking at within the elementary zones. So they show this up through 12th grade, but it's really just focused on the elementary zones we have in the city. And the red effectively is telling you that on average, they're seeing a slight decrease year to year. If this thing lit up stoplight green, then that would mean you're seeing growth year to year. And that to me would say people are moving into the community, or I guess families, not necessarily people. But clearly we're seeing some downward trend in that year to year change. And I should say too, stop me at any time. I'm happy to, if there's any questions at any time, just let me know. And then this is those yield factors. So they look at some of the more recent developments that have happened, and they look at how many units there are, and then they break out the kids by kind of schooling level, elementary, middle school, high school, and then they make a determination. The way to think about it is basically for every 100 units, how many students would we expect out of that? And that's what they use to determine everything with the future development that is happening in the city. So the example there, if you go down to the purple, you have the Carson Hills apartments. And I think this is a really good example. So you have, at that time, 370 units. I thought it was like 390, actually, as I think about it, but maybe there's some difference there I'm not aware of. But 370 units, and if you follow that over 4 columns to the right, K through 12, there's 55 students that are coming out of that. That's a low ratio, really. Now, I don't know that those apartments are an ideal place necessarily for families to locate, just given where it is up on the hill. But clearly, we're not seeing a lot of families come out of that. If you go down to the green area, those are your single-family housing developments. Schultz Ranch is kind of the big one that actually started some years ago, so we have good information on it. But at the time of this, 397 units built, but 80 kids coming out of that. So K-12, if you look all the way off to the right, then it says 0.202 for the yield factor under K-12 for Schultz Ranch. So basically for every 100 units that was developed, we got about 20 students out of that. They're spread across all the different grade levels. And so they look at it between the multifamily housing and then the single-family housing, and they come up with factors, and those are at the bottom. So you can see for K-12 single-family developments, they expect about 0.21. So for every 100 houses that are built, about 21 students to come out of that. And for every 100 units of multifamily or apartments, they expect 0.195. So if you think about it in terms of whatever you build, about 100 units, we get about 20 students. The average that they generally work with is about 30 students per 100. So we're below average in terms of generating students out of the housing that's coming into the city. This just shows all the developments that they considered around the city with their information. So they're taking into account kind of everything that is going on. This one is not going to be as important to you. This is not going to be as important. So these are the projections then by grade level across the city. So the orange column, 2022. And I should note as well, these are resident students. So these are kids who, they're Carson City resident students. We do have students that come in from other districts. There are variances between other districts. So, but this is in terms of just who's actually living in the city. And you can see if you just focus on kindergarten at the top, and you see those numbers kind of hitting into the mid 400s, which is a drop. When I first came here 8 years ago, that number was 600, pretty much like clockwork. So that has definitely dropped over time. And then if you think about it just in terms of kindergartners are moving through the system, so those lower numbers are just feeding through and feeding through. So as they come through, you start seeing lower numbers at the higher grade levels. One of the things I would note about this projection is that, so when they're looking at this change of year to year of first graders going to second graders and second grade going to third grade, we had this large anomaly of a year when COVID happened, and we lost a lot of students, like districts across the country. We lost a lot of students during COVID. So our district enrollment in the last 2 years has dropped about 7%, which is a pretty significant drop. But because that is being averaged in here, it gives me some pause to say that, well, that outsized anomaly may be having a larger effect than what we would really expect. So I don't know that I really expect, I do expect numbers to decline slightly over time. I don't know that I expect them to decline this much. And if you look at the far, far bottom, you have the total K-12 number. So resident students, basically 5-year-olds through 18-year-olds in Carson City schools, there's 7,034. And then if you follow that over to the right, you can see how that is expected to drop over time. The other thing I would note is that just above that, the 9 through 12, a lot of times we talk about Carson High School being too full, there's too many kids, and there are a lot of students in Carson High School. This is 9 through 12 is including students from Pioneer High School, because Carson High and Pioneer High don't have individual zones, so they just have to combine all the kids together. And that's why this number looks a little bit high, but you can still see over time that 9 through 12 population, as these smaller grade levels make their way up to the 9-12, we do expect the population to ease, the capacity issues to ease at Carson High School here over time. And this just gets into the individual schools, and I can certainly go through any of these if there's any interest. Actually, I'll point out Empire. When I first got here in 2014, I think Empire's population was almost 600 students, and they are now below 450, and they're projected to drop from there. And that's actually of any of our schools, that is the one that has had the most significant decline in population of any of our schools, which is interesting, and I don't know necessarily good reasons for that, but that is one that we have kept our eye on over time. And I'll say all of the schools are expected to drop over time, which makes sense just in terms of the overall trend of what we're seeing in the community. So,
AJ,
yeah.
Empire's a Title I school?
Correct. And actually, all of our elementary schools now qualify for Title I.
Okay.
But Empire was kind of the original, which is based on socioeconomic factors and
Well,
free and reduced lunches.
The question is, does that correlate with, being a Title I school?
Oh,
Are
sure.
Are we not having those kinds of kids anymore? Or are they?
Oh, sure. And thank you for the clarification. So if a school qualifies for Title I services, it's because they're free, usually because their free and reduced lunch rate, their qualifications are very high, at least well over 40% is, and usually it's getting up into the 70, 80. And in the Empire area, going into about 10 years ago, I think it was around 85%. And now at some point they qualified where every student at Empire just eats for free now, breakfast or lunch, because the rate had gotten so high. And so I don't know that it's necessarily a correlation there. I don't know if it is, as big as that school was, if there just hasn't been the turnover in that area with older families moving out and younger families moving in. There's a lot of the population of that school is in apartment buildings in that area. The Woodside Apartments I know has a really high density of students that go there, but the single family homes themselves seem to be producing fewer and fewer. So I won't go through all of these because there's quite a few of them, but I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns. Yes, sir.
The number of kids that start first grade that don't go to second or something like that. There was one there that, one more back. Okay, here we go. So this is the difference here. Historical correlation of births versus kindergarten class. So this is births in the city, and then how many actually go to kindergarten? So I really had two questions there. Is that because these people are moving away, do you think? Or is there a percentage here that are not captured, that are homeschooled or going to private schools or going to charter schools?
I think it's a little bit of both, quite honestly. So you have had, during COVID, we had more families choose to homeschool students, especially at the elementary level. And that's usually where it occurs, but homeschool students, I know I'm almost certain that St. Teresa's and some of the private schools, some people decided to send their schools to the private schools because of what we had to do on our side in the public schools. So I think that is a part of it. At some point, I would expect that some of those kids would come back, probably not all of them, but some of them. I think part of it is, I think what we've seen in the last number of years with, Hope showed you some of the median housing prices. And I think for some families that, I just think of a young working class family trying to move into Carson, that is hard. That is really hard to swallow. So I think that's a part of it, maybe too.
So housing costs, basically.
I think that's a part of it. Yeah. And I would say too, just in the bigger picture of things, you have, in general, people are having smaller families, right? You don't have as many, and that was a number Hope shared as well. You don't see quite as many kids in the families. There's one other thing I was going to say. Well, and just the overall demographic of Carson City then is also aging, right? So if you go back to, I had done a presentation on my board little over a year ago. If you go back to the year 2000, the population of Carson City that was over the age of 65 was about 15%, and now it's about 20%. So Carson's aging as well. And so I think there's a lot of variables there that all kind of work into some of this.
Do you have a sense of how many of the kids that are graduating from high school are actually coming back, or is there, any sort of feeling there that you hear from folks of, gee, there's opportunity here, so once I get my degree or my technical degree, I'm going to stay, or gee, there's no opportunity here, so I'm going to leave?
I don't know. That we do track students 5 years out in terms of what they are doing after that, usually more in terms of career. But I don't know if we have any information in terms of location, but that's something I could ask. That may be something that we do have.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, thank you, AJ, for being here today. And I was just wondering if we could get a copy of this presentation. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Further questions for AJ? Seeing none, I think you got off easy.
Eddie and Andy.
Oh, Eddie and Andy.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Andy Hummel, for the record, wastewater utility manager for Carson City Public Works. With me today, Eddie Quaglieri, our water utility manager. And this is our annual update on water and wastewater capacity and usage in Carson City. Since Eddie puts the presentation together, I tend to get to go first on the wastewater side, even though it's kind of the bottom of the system, but, so save all the good questions for the very end for him. From the wastewater standpoint, I kind of put that little diagram in to, it all basically starts with our customers once they've used Eddie's water and flush it down the toilet, wash it down their drain, whatever they do with it, and send it to us. We have about a little over 300 miles of collection system pipeline and sewage lift stations throughout the city that convey that flow to our treatment plant. Our treatment plant is on East 5th Street. It's permitted for about 6.9 million gallons a day of flow. We're a 100% reuse facility, so we use reuse system pipeline to get that up to, we have a reservoir up in Brunswick Canyon. We store it there in the winter, and then in the summer, we're typically irrigating at our 4 sites around town: Eagle Valley Golf Course, Empire Ranch Golf Course, Silver Oak Golf Course, and then the prison farm. And then that whole system, we have a staff of 21 operators, mechanics. We have an environmental control division, goes around to businesses and makes sure nobody's sending bad stuff down the drain that would impact the treatment process. We have a on-site chemist, and then a number of sewer technicians out in the field keeping the pipelines flowing, that kind of stuff. From a capacity standpoint, that graph there is through 2022. We've been averaging the last 3 years pretty close to 5 million gallons a day. And every year I point out that that's influenced heavily by growth, moisture content in the soil, water rates, people using more or less water. The water costs more, they tend to conserve. This year, today we're just under 6 million gallons a day, and that's indication of the moisture. Just this, in very intense wet spring that we had is showing up at the treatment plant. We get a little bit of inflow at, any leaky joint in the manholes, whatever. It's kind of a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of thing. Little, little jets of water coming in here or there add up. So we're seeing, just a little over or about 1 million gallons a day higher than we would normally see this time of year. I went back and looked at 2017, the last time we had a really wet spring. Very similar pattern. 2017, our highest month was in March, same that we saw this year. We had just under 6.9 million gallons a day for March that year, our peak wet month. And this year for March, we were about 7.3 million gallons a day. That capacity of 6.9 is an annual average. You can see in 2017, we were about 5.4 is what we averaged for the year. So it gets to about June, July, and we really start tapering off as that groundwater tapers away. So the other thing I wanted to point out there, we typically use see a trend upwards of about 0.9% in our flow rate long-term. And that high month between March of 2017 and March of 2023 was almost exactly 0.9%. So that seems to kind of validate that, so.
So Andy, a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So that spike in the spring, like when we have a lot of runoff, is that because there's stormwater going to the treatment plant, or is that leakage from high water, groundwater levels into the system that's collected by the stormwater?
Yes,
or
very,
collected by the
very
treatment
good distinction there. We are a separate storm and storm sewer system, so we don't collect the stormwater. The catch basins on the street don't go to the municipal sewer system. They are a separate system, but what it is especially in a storm event, when there starts becoming street flooding or any little ponding on the street, every sewer manhole will get a little bit of leakage around it, and that will come into the sewer system. It's kind of impossible to get those to seal just the way they work, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the bulk of the stormwater it's a completely separate system. Yeah, yep. So as I mentioned, the wharf is permitted for 6.9 MGD annually average. We would, so if I projected that, what that 5.4% that we saw in 2017 for the annual average at our 0.9%, that puts us, we should see about 5.7 MGD for this year. Our trigger, that yellow line on there, is our trigger for when we need to start planning for our next round of upgrades. That is about 5.9 million gallons a day. So we still are projected to stay under that, even if we stay wet this year and our flows stay artificially high. So, and then we're still well under our almost 7 MGD of permitted capacity. So, and that I did look to, like, if we got our full 3% growth rate, we would still have 2 years if we had that 5.7 before we'd hit that trigger just for the facility planning. We do have in our CIP this upcoming year budget to do facility planning if that does trigger, so we can stay ahead of it. CIP, our capital improvement plan, I'm sorry, yeah, yep.
Andy, I have a couple of questions for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that, first of all, yeah, you have different recharge areas for the effluent. So it goes to the golf courses, and then doesn't it also go to like Edmonds Park and some of the other recreational sites?
It used to, it does not anymore.
Does not anymore.
Yep.
My question for you is that right now, I know the capacity has increased. So, number one, why aren't we using it in our parks? Number two, the question would be, is when Empire is like it is right now, underwater, are you able to channel that water to other areas so we can recharge our aquifers?
What we do, we store it in our reservoir up in Brunswick Canyon. That reservoir has about a 3,000 acre foot capacity. We're currently at about 1,200 acre feet in it. That's last summer, at the tail end of the drought, it was almost empty. So we have several years of storage there, even if our reuse drops off. We did do some reuse planning a couple of years ago to look at triggers and what would, those other sites that you mentioned, they were taken off in 2013 in the drought then. Basically just, we were producing even less or seeing even less flow to the treatment plant and didn't have enough water to serve those parks and our other customers. So the city parks were taken off at that time, but the infrastructure is still largely there. It'd be relatively simple to connect those if we needed to.
So for instance, if our reservoir goes ahead and recharges up and we have several years like this, the parks can go back on that? Because right now, I think, and that would be more of an Eddie question, I think, is that are we using our water capacity to water the parks and recreation parks instead of using effluent?
Yeah, right now they are on domestic water. Yeah, at the time, we were basically using domestic water to supplement the reuse system to be able to supply the parks. So we basically, rather than add that domestic water to the system just to put it back out, it was cut that middleman out, basically. Yep. Yeah. Let's see. Yep. I'll jump to on our collection system. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Eddie. We also look at, the pipelines out in the system, our lift stations and such. We keep a master plan of that capacity updated. We look at it about every 5 years. We last updated it in 2021. It is a build-out based model, so we look at the same land use data that Hope and her group are using. So we use that to kind of look at the various areas of the city, what could develop there, what capacity improvements would be needed if those happened with our pipelines, as well as drive any, if we need to upsize a lift station, something like that. And then that effort also develops our CIP, our capital improvement plan for any existing, capacity deficiencies we may have or future. So that helps drive not only the condition of the pipes, what we need to replace, but if we have something that's undersized. Is this not one to-
Can you talk to us about the little red square over there in the right-hand corner? Or the zigzag?
Yeah, so that is one of our areas that was identified. Let's see if I can- It's basically, it's just upstream of our treatment plant, so that one was identified in red. We have a lift station right at the treatment plant, so that is, that line comes in, captures both we have a line coming down Airport Road as well as the stuff across Lampa. That one shows up in the model as artificially high because of that lift station there. The lift station will back up a little bit to create enough storage to run the pumps and then pull down. So in the model, it shows up as artificially high. So they identified that with that red to,
Okay, so it's.
yeah, make it
it's
stand
not
out.
something we need to do, it's just a condition of. the
Yeah, how
environment.
it's operated.
Okay.
Yep. There, it's working. And the other side of that, not just looking at, our capacity in those lines, but also how old they're getting, any, looking at the asset management side of it to decide when something does need to replace. One of the things we've went to in the last couple of years, traditionally, CCTV was used, basically a little robot tractor that went inside the pipe, cabled to the van, and you'd run it down the pipe and be able to see what the pipe inside looked like. Tells you a lot of data, but takes a while to do. And we would hire a consultant to come in and, they'd get 10, 15% of the system every year for us. Some relatively new technology that uses sound. So basically, it's that in the picture there in the lower right, one manhole you insert a microphone and the other one a receiver to basically tell from the series of sounds that it makes kind of roughly how blocked that line is. For what we were paying to get 10, 15% of the city done, we were able to do half. And so between last year and this year, we've now done 100% of all of our smaller lines, everything up to about 12-inch. And what that does is it doesn't necessarily tell us what's causing that blockage, but if anything that is blocked, that's what the sewer crews, our technicians need to go and look at quickly. And then they can video that, and was it just some grease buildup, wipes, is it failing, what needs to be done? And then saves them some time so then they can go video more of our system on our own. Another big one that we did, yes.
Real quickly,
Yeah.
question, I guess Commissioner Lloyd for the record. Does this also go from the city's line up to residents?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, yep. But it did generate a lot of interest. They were able to talk to a lot of homeowners in the process, curious what they were doing. Probably slowed them. It was normally a very quick, 2-3 minutes they're there and on to the next one. And invariably they were filling somebody in on what they were doing. So it was good outreach as well. On the treatment plant, we did just finish some electrical upgrades. This has been a couple of years in the making. Some of our issues that we had with COVID was just getting electrical components. Eddie and I both faced that as well as many other industries, but it took us a year just to procure the parts to do our upgrades that we did out there. But it's a lot of new, motor controllers, breakers was one of the big one. A lot of our breakers are not the little 15, 20 amp that we might find in our homes, but 400 or 500 amp, 480 volt big that they don't make anymore. So being able to upgrade those was big for our reliability. We've also upgraded a lot of our lift stations, basically just modernize them, make them easier to service, less prone to blockage. And then with the capacity of our pipelines, we've trying to do a lot of just pipeline replacement and rehabs, whether it's a capacity driven or if it's something that from an asset management standpoint, we need to replace because it's wearing out. We were looking at one on Silver Stage and Kuntz right now. We're talking with contractors on possibly pipe bursting that one just because of the depth and groundwater down in that area to reduce the impact. William Street is in design right now. There's a decent amount of sewer replacement there. And then also, like in the 10th in Nevada, we'll be starting a smaller one there. Just basically the line is worn out. So with that, I think that takes us to Eddie. Any questions for my side before we transition to Eddie?
Andy, I'd just like to say thank you as
Yeah.
somebody that has lived here back when we had the sewer ponds on on 5th Street and all the
Yep.
seagulls.
Yes.
It's really, we've really come a long way. And it's nice to see this because I asked for this about 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
And it's so nice to see it now. Thank
Good.
you.
Can I ask one more question, Madam Chairman?
Yeah.
Andy, when you hit that point to where you what was it, 5.9 or something like that, where you're a trigger to start planning,
Yep.
can you give us some kind of an idea of how an expansion of the sewage treatment plant would be done? Is it just a modular, we need to add some more biological reactors and various things like that? Or is there a point where it's a real step up with a bigger footprint?
It's a little bit of both. Some things are like that. We did add in our improvements that we started around 2015. Our biological reactors, it would be most likely adding another one of those, for example. And then some of our stuff could handle build out as it currently exists. So some of it may be, adding more, upsizing some pipes internally to get more flow through certain areas. There's, we're also anticipating at some point, the state will likely tighten regulations. So there may be, different process changes that need to happen with that. That could be a trigger as well if flows drop down and we don't hit that 85%, that the state could, with a new permit, decide to push us that way, potentially.
What's your classification of your effluent?
It's
A,
Class
or
B.
Class B?
Yep,
Okay, so it can be used for irrigating,
yep.
but you have no discharge permit, right?
We have a discharge permit for the reservoir,
Okay,
oddly enough, because some of that water does seep through. It's an earthen reservoir. It doesn't leak through the dam. It's basically through the bottom of the reservoir.
okay,
So some of that water does come out as springs.
but not
Yeah.
into a water body.
Some of that spring water does make it to the Carson River, so that's why that is permitted.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
yeah.
All right, we'll move on to drinking water then. Obviously, a banner year for water, as we've all seen, and I think I was the only one at Public Works, secretly cheering it on while everyone else was plowing snow and getting into the sewer system and everything else. But it was nice to end the drought we were in and recharge some things. So I go through this every year, the drinking water system overview. I'll breeze through the facts and everything. We're maintaining 350 miles of pipe, 16 different pressure zones, 13 booster pump stations, 16 storage tanks, about 60 pressure reducing valves. That's all to make all these different water systems work together that we have. You can kind of look at it as like 16 different water systems all coordinating and working in unison. Split amongst that, we have about 28 groundwater wells, 2 river induction wells that run off Carson River rights, and then 3 distinct surface water sources that we treat at Quill, Ash, Kings, and Marlette Hobart water. We have 2 treatment plants, Quill Water Treatment Plant, Arsenic Treatment Plant. We also blend throughout town. That also acts as treatment. We have 2 interconnections with Lyon County and Douglas. Transmission main running from Minden up all the way to Quill now. We run aquifer storage and recovery programs. One is an active program where we pump treated water from Quill down into into groundwater wells to store that water and to blend down the water in the ground. We also passively recharge it through VC Canyon, through the ponds up there. We have about 20 licensed operators working 24/7. So next, I show this slide every year, and it's not to confuse everybody. It's just to show how diverse our water portfolio is. And it looks complicated and scary, but it's actually a really good thing. It's similar to your financial portfolio. You want a diverse portfolio, money coming from different sources and hedging and all that kind of financial terminology. We also have shown on this is all Andes water that comes to offset the drinking water for the golf courses and for the prison farms. So that's another good thing. The next is showing our metered water usage and demand summary. It also shows our total water rights. So this is actually metered billing data. And you can see that downward linear trend that we're tracking. But we're also planning for build out. As mentioned earlier, about 82,000 people. That increases our annual usage by about 5,000 acre feet. That's the projection. That also increases our peak day demand. So it's kind of, we're showing annual demand, but also we got to remember that the system's really built to provide this summertime peak demand. And that is projected to increase by 8 million gallons per day to meet that build out with a 20% peak or a buffer. So this next slide's new.
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
If you could go back to that, I do have
Yeah.
a question. So So, you know, every year you come in with this, and every year I kind of get excited about this, but because in 2008, we were using over 12,000 acre feet of water. Last year, we used 9957, and that is with, you know, a certain amount of growth in the city. What do you attribute the decrease in water consumption in the city to?
Yeah, so it's, you know, smarter water use, conservation. That conservation can come from, like what Andy was saying, you know, if we're increasing rates, people will use less. And that's happened twice now since that 2008. The rates have gone up, so people are either taking out lawns. It's also efficient fixtures, but overall, it's just mostly smarter water use, you know, overall. And it shows our communities on, you know, the right path there. And the next slide I have, it kind of highlights that as well. Did you have any other questions on that? Okay. So what we're showing here is I put together this slide showing our residential customers that are served by Carson City. So just looking at the billing data for those residential customers, splitting that out of the whole pie. And then it's showing their per capita daily water usage. And then the bar graphs are the residential water customers served. Yeah, so it's showing our growth throughout the population, just for residential. And how I got that was from the amount of water meters we installed for residential usage. So this shows, you know, it was somewhere above 200 gallons per day per capita, and now we're, you know, edging closer to 150. So that just kind of, and remember the residential is about 75–80% of our demand. So it's a big portion of our water. Any questions on that? Okay. Jumping into projects, an update on our CIP. We've done about 4 water well rehabs this past winter, and that's important to keep up on because as time goes on, your wells will degrade over time like anything, and you got to keep rehabbing. So it's something that we really have focused on the past few years, is really staying up on that. We've created a well rehab program and we follow it. Of course, you have things, you know, fail on you and you got to rehab them. So it's a juggling act. We've also replaced a main PRV up in the Timberline area this past spring. That was a major project. We're pushing Quill water treatment plant towards 90% design. We're currently in procurement of filters and UV system at the moment. Once we get those buttoned up and under contract, we're going to move to 90% design. Some important water studies I wanted to update you on. You know, there's a revised lead and copper rule that came out in 2022, and we have to map our entire service lines, both the city-owned and the customer-owned. So we're in the middle of doing that right now. That's due by 2024. We're updating our source water protection plan with a whole group of shareholders on that. We're updating our water model, so we have good data on what we can supply in what area of town. The last update was done about 5 years ago, so it was time to update it on our new demands and new sources and everything. And that will lead into a new water resource plan update. The last one was done in 2018. We're also trying out some new meter technology, some smart meter type things.
How do those work? Like,
So I say smart meters may have a bad connotation, but it's it allows us to get the billing data without driving the truck around picking up the routes. So instead of having someone drive a truck that picks up your billing, your meter number, it would be sent over a cellular to our billing department automatically.
so it's wireless.
Yeah,
So those things
wireless.
like I have one of those, I think, in my when I lift it up, there's some little transponder or something. So
transponder, yeah.
that communicates directly to your
That
department?
translates to our truck now. So a truck has to drive by your street and pick it
Okay.
up. But what we'd like to move towards is that information getting sent wirelessly right to our billing computers. So,
Excuse me, and
The
how long
idea-
would that take? Because I
Yeah.
I know that I just got a call from Dayton Water to tell me that a toilet was leaking because they have one of those.
mhm.
And I've also had not Tahoe, no, what is it? Truckee Meadows. Truckee Meadows call me and tell me that I have a leaking toilet in an office
Yep.
building. So, I mean, those, and they've been absolutely spot on every time. So my question is what, that'd be pretty monumental to bring that to every resident.
Yeah, it will be. There's a lot of improvement to it and efficiency to it. You can tell leaks within, 15 minutes even.
No, I was
So,
really impressed.
Right now, it would take us, a billing cycle to determine that you had high water usage, so. Yeah, it's something, doing it all at once is an expensive venture, but as we buy them, all we have to do is change out those transponders, and the meter in place can support that. So as we buy new ones, we're trying out a test study to see how they work. As we buy new ones after that test study is done, we'll probably switch to that technology. So. Moving on to projects and system efficiency, redundancy, and future demand-related projects. I've presented on this, and then I show the graph showing how we're going to meet that peak day demand in the summer. But these are some projects that we have undergoing and some done. East-west transmission main that was built bringing our transmission water all the way up to Quill. That brings it from our lowest zone in the system up to our highest zones. So it's just a big resilient redundancy effort. We have Quill going that we've already gone over. That's about a 5 MGD increase to our current plant. And that's moving towards 90% soon. Well rehabs, like I said, we're always keeping on our well rehabs to keep that current production active that we have. And then I'll just jump to the next slide. That talks about the
Before you do that, can you
Yeah.
give us a definition of the term conjunctive use?
Yes. Conjunctive use of water is managing your surface water and groundwater conjunctively so that you make the most efficient use of it. And how I see it is you're using your surface water when it's available so that we can rest our groundwater table, so that we have that during drier years when we don't have the surface water. That's how I see it. So the next slide relates to this slide. And it shows our max day demand. And then that's in the bar graphs, and that's current up to 2022. You can also see that downward trend in that peak day, which, shows a lot with the population that you saw growing. And then the blue line at the top shows our, that 35 MGD build out. That's our current plus the 8 MGD that we need to meet build out demand. And then the other lines are showing, how examples of how we can meet that, and some of which we're already doing, which is the Quill project. That's a big one. But another well redrill can add about 1.4 MGD, and another induction well along the river could add another 2.2 MGD. So those are just wanted to show you some examples of what it would take to meet that build out demand, plus that 20% buffer. So if there's no other questions, if anyone have any questions on this? Again, it's just an example to show you how we're working towards meeting the build out. And so with that, I will conclude our presentation and answer any questions.
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, thank you, Chair. For some of these more like innovative pilot projects that you're doing of like testing these smart meters, are there ways for residents to opt in to those types of programs and like volunteer to be the guinea pigs?
Hadn't thought about that yet, but it's a good idea. Are you signing up?
I am signing up.
Okay. We'll see what we can do. We have about 20 of them in our shop, and so we're putting them out there right now.
What do they cost?
So, yeah, so the cost of it are about the same as the other transponders. So again, we're not changing out the meter.
No, I'm
Meter
just
stays the
thinking,
same.
I'm trying to think of a program. How much does it cost?
The program, yeah, so
No, the meter.
the meter itself, so what's cool about it is you could keep the meter the same, and then the transponder is what sends the signal from the register on the meter.
Sure.
So the transponder costs the same about.
Well,
What does
is-
cost more?
What is that? What is that
Oh.
number?
$100
All
per
right.
transponder.
All right, so if I
So-
gave you $100 for a transponder and you gave me $10 credit for 10 months, you'd have a transponder and I'd have one too.
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
The cost of this program is the cost of the cellular device fee. That's to send that signal over the cellular network to our computer. And that's where the cost is of all this.
But I'm saying if you want to accelerate this and you want a community participation, if you can work up something like that, I
Yeah.
think you would have a
That's
lot of
another good
people
idea.
that would be interested in doing that. Just take $10 off my water bill for 10 months
Sure.
or whatever it is. But
I'm
We
going to
will,
throw
we
out.
will
I
take
think
that.
something else too is that if you did that, and then you wouldn't have the people driving around in their trucks trying to go ahead and do that, that would take the time for new vehicles, a person, all of the benefits for that individual to do that. What is, yeah, gas.
Yep, wear and
Right, I mean,
tear. And,
let's-
and so it's about 6 days a month we're driving. There's somebody in a truck driving routes. So that's all part of the economics of it. We're saving that amount of time, which is invaluable.
How long does the battery last?
15, 20 years.
Is that right?
Yep,
Wow.
they've gotten a lot better.
And I was just going to throw out, if there are meters that are Wi-Fi connection, I mean, almost every single home has a Wi-Fi connection of some sort. I know it would be an issue if it came offline and then you weren't able to bill, but just throwing that out as an option.
Yeah, no,
think
it's a
about.
good thing to look into.
I was just going to comment that I had a break between the meter and my house, like, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, and I wish I'd have known it because it ran for almost a month and I had a $600 water bill I had to pay. So that would save me that, or any resident, for that. But my other question is, how are the groundwater levels doing in town? I know you monitor those and you've showed them in the past, but I'm just curious, you're going to see a big recharge year this year?
Definitely. And we've heard that from a lot of residents with their crawl spaces filling up. They'll call us up and see what's going on. So yeah, it's come up a lot. Mhm. Thank you.
Madam Chair, do you want to go to public comment? There's a lot of department heads and employees here who maybe will need to respond to public comment.
I'd like to open it up to public comment. Hi, Heather, please sign in.
Oh,
Thank you.
Heather Coe, and I actually have a lot of questions after all this. We didn't think the downtown project was going to cost as much as it did, and everyone's rates went up tremendously. And I don't think people are using water wisely all of a sudden. They're probably like my family and my daughters who can't afford their water bills, along with everything else that's gone up. And I'd like to know if the water company can shut your water off, just as they've done in other states with those smart meters, because that's terrifying. Or if they could be hacked into, that's also really scary. I have a huge issue with the fact that I have lived here since the 70s. I've never seen Carson grow this fast. And it's going to get a lot worse once everything that was permitted goes up, sits empty, as it did in 2008, once we had a recession. We are in one now. Inflation is off the charts. Nothing seems to be getting better. And there was a lot of damaged homes that sat empty. And that's going to be a problem too. I would love for everyone to focus on taking what Carson has turned into over the last maybe 8 to 6 years, which looks like a neglected junkyard any longer, to making it a nice place where people want to come. And no one seems to ever want to focus on that. And I'm just curious as to why. I have 3 neighbors that are moving. They said this is not why they chose to live here. It looks like a junkyard. That's where I got that from. It's getting overpopulated. The roads are horrific. We don't have money for any new massive growth as we have been doing that's been permitted out. So I would just pray that everyone stop and think and take a drive around, because it really does look like a neglected junkyard anymore. But we should be focusing on small businesses, maybe downtown, what was done privately, not by the city, with the downtown project. The private funds, they did a lot. It brought a lot of people downtown, one specific area, and that's about it. I mean, there's not a lot for people to do here, but yet no one's focusing on tourism or making things beautiful. How about more parks? Do something instead of all the massive growth, which people are not going to be living in a majority of these places because they're overpriced, everything that you guys have permitted, almost everything. So I would just hope that everyone would stop and think before there's any more destruction to Carson. And I appreciate what you guys do. But I mean, drive around. It's gotten really horrible. And we don't have money for our roads right now. I mean, our mayor said she is going to put an 8 or 9 cent gas tax up. Oh, and if no one likes it, then I guess they could drive on dirt roads, according to her. That was her response, which I thought was really horrific. But things are so expensive right now. You're going to have a lot of more people that are moving out. And these places will sit empty. So I just hope that everyone considers all of these things. Thank you.
There's a number of seats at the table. If you plan to speak, you don't have to wait for the next person. You can go take a seat.
Maxine Neitz, resident, taxpayer, voter, and civil engineer. I'm going to start with a quote from someone who escaped Soviet Russia, the Nazis, and ended up in the United States. Every individual is a community. It is now time for the city, and you are the city representatives here, to start paying attention to the individuals of this community and not worrying about whether the developers can have their funding and whether their funding is going to work out for them. Since the mayor mentioned Reno Sparks, and she wants us to be just like Reno Sparks, I'll say we are about the same size as Reno Sparks. Their population is 6.5 times ours. Ours is already at 400 people per square mile. Do we want that to really go up to 2,600 people per square mile and be just like Reno Sparks? I, for one, don't. We have all these allocations, and they keep going up every year, more and more. Why? Why? We're only using about 1/3 of them. There's really no reason for this. If you're only using 300 allocations or roughly 300 allocations, why do we have to have a 3% growth? Why don't we just fix a number at 300 or 350 and let it ride until we find that there's a situation where we're getting close to or need to revisit that number? We have way more developer allocations than we have what I would call Harry homeowner allocations, which is also not fair, since the developers, by and large, are not from around here, and Harry homeowner is from around here. Why are we building twice as many apartments as homes? You're changing the character of Carson City. I'm not sure what the authority you have to do that is, but Carson City is a small city, a town of single-family homes. By building all these apartments, you are deliberately trying to change the character of this city. The voters don't like that. We definitely don't like that. As far as the agencies that commented, not a one of them recommended an increase. Many of them said they could manage, especially if they had more taxpayer money in their budget. Well, you know what? We taxpayers are not an unlimited resource. We're being tapped out every day. My gas bill is $450 a month. I know it's not a city bill, but it's just one of the deals that I have to pay for. As an aging citizen, I'm living on a fixed income. I don't have the ability to go out and rob a bank and increase my income. The sheriff was at least honest and said, overdoses are up 125%. The jail is at over its 80% capacity, where health and safety issues are happening. The schools are in a different situation. They do not have to worry. By federal law, they have to take anyone who comes to them. Carson City is not in that position. We do not have to take every development that comes here. We have to preserve the city that we have. We don't want this growth. In addition, there were 3 zones that I could not figure out: mixed-use residential, mixed-use commercial, and mixed-use employment that were on the master plan list, show that they're being built. They have no underlying zones attached to them. And why are we building more medium density or less medium density residential than high density residential? Again, it goes back to the fact that you're trying to change the character of Carson City. We don't want the character changed. We came here for the Carson City we know and love. Thank you.
Betsy Strasberg. I agree with a lot of the comments that Maxime made earlier. As I read through the staff report, there is no established methodology in the growth management ordinance on how to calculate the allocations, only that essential resources must be considered to make that allocation. The current practice is 3% growth rate of prior year allowable permits. And even though Hope was kind enough to show a range of 2 to 3% in the resolution backup, the average annual permits used from 2018 to 2022 is 309, and I used the 541 number that Hope showed in 2018, and that was due to the growth of the multifamily units. Annual units should, this commission can approve with conditions, or deny due to the adverse impact on city resources. As I read the staff reports, only the fire department, who has a 4th fire station coming online, and the school district with declining enrollments, the other departments anticipated a need of increased workload or a downward detriment due to the additional growth. And they're only looking at 2024, and their budgets were approved only last week. So it's not a big planning horizon there. Also in the staff report, it talked about giving the planning group maximum flexibility with the higher allocations. Also talked about developers using that number for financing for proposed developments, that it would suppress the economic activity of Carson City, or it will increase the inventory of affordable housing. None of that is within the purview of this board. You're only looking at resources, and all the departments have said that they would need additional resources except for the fire department and the school. And the sheriff said, yes, the largest department in this town. He also talked about adverse impact of this congested growth. So I urge this commission to look at a fixed number that is reasonable over the last few years of used permits and not on a abnormal number. With that 3% by 2033, we will reach a number of 1,000 permits. And so what? What does that mean? It means nothing to the residents. Use the number that we are using over the last 5 years and a fixed number. Thank you.
Richard Nagel for the record. I concur with both Maxine and Betsy Strasburg that we do need a fixed number. And it could be an average of the past 10 years, but we do need a fixed number instead of something that grows exponentially. The Quill water treatment plant is still in the design phase. So we can't, that water's hard to access because of the turbidity of the water and the filtration system we have at this point. So again, that's a concern of mine. The other thing that bothered me was the fact that we're not using that reservoir up in the canyon, Coombs Canyon, for golf courses or city parks. At least that's what I heard. So that thing is pretty much full. If you go up and I just went up there and took a look at it, and it's pretty good, got a good capacity, and I don't understand why we're not using that to offset the regular water that we're using. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, but we need to look at those things down the road and how we can hook those things up and get in line with that. And I wanted just to say I appreciated the questions that people asked here, the people here, because again, the school system is having increased competition. They've got iSchool, they've got the Lutheran Church School, and several other schools are starting to pop up. I just think that the way that they're teaching nowadays, a lot of people say that it's an unsafe environment. So that's what I've heard, and people are getting a better education at home and at these schools from what they've said. So again, there is more competition for what's going on and for resources. So we either improve the product that we're selling or providing, or we'll face competition. Thank you much.
Hi, good evening. My name's Karen. Is this on? Yeah. Oh, okay. My name's Karen Stevens, and thank you for taking public comment. I especially appreciate some of the questions that Richard Perry asked. I thought they were very insightful. Having retired from education, I was familiar with the data that Fueling was talking about, but we've been like 49, 50th in the nation for probably 15 years. And so the reason there's this huge declining enrollment is people are taking their kids out of these schools. They are trashing their minds with transgenderism and sexual education that is inappropriate. So yeah, that's why we're losing a lot of kids. I know a lot of parents that are homeschooling now because these schools are very bad nowadays. So besides that we really have more kids in this community than he's showing on his charts, I'm in agreement with Betsy and Richard and the previous speakers because this percentage increase per year is not, I don't think that's a very appropriate way to determine how many homes or apartments you're going to approve, because If you look at our community and our roads are just horrific. I've lived here 26 years, and every year these roads are just going down the tubes. They're terrible. But we just keep bringing in more houses and more apartments, and there's no money to fix the roads. So what are we doing? So those are my questions, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Okay, I can't hear the speakers from here. My name is Thomas Burnt. I'm a longtime Carson City resident of 30 years. I'm going to add some contrast to the discussion and say I think you guys are doing a good job. I like the Carson City community the way it is. I think we've hit a sweet spot. Therefore, I'd say let's keep it that way. I know we all need more money for roads. We don't want developers bringing in a lot of their additional burdens, to say it simple. So I would suggest, is there a way to go upstream? Is there a way to use your brains, use your resources to help get some money from some of the big developers coming in like Tesla and these lithium mines? We're offering a lot of abatements on a different level. How does Carson City leverage the impact from the growth in those respective areas to bring in money to the state capitol so we can have better roads that the crossover brings? That's the million-dollar question. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Keep up the good work, but keep Carson City the way it is, please.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Okay. Hope, can we go on with our presentations, please?
Essentially, what you're being asked to do is make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. There's three things. I had outlined them at the beginning. There's a resolution that I've prepared. In preparing the resolution, I've identified using the methodology that's been in place since, I think, 2006. So I have not changed that methodology. I just did that in the spirit of consistency. If you feel we should change the methodology, I don't have a quarrel with it. But I have given you a recommendation using that methodology. I've also stayed with the same division between the general property owner and the developer categories. Those have worked. We haven't had any problems with those. And we are recommending a reduction in the maximum average daily water usage for commercial and industrial building permits from 15,000 gallons a day to 10,000 gallons per day. Would be the threshold for growth management review. And I'll go to the numbers for you. And I'll turn it over to the commission.
Commissioner Borders.
You know I'm not a friend of your 3%. First of all, on your slide number 13, with to solve that problem, would you in the future show which one of those projects are still active and what their average consumption is so that we can have something to compare that with?
Sure, and looking at the most recent 5, none of them have been realized.
I don't think any of them have been realized, but it would
Yeah.
be handy to know that.
Well, Olive Garden's there, but yes,
Okay.
we can check.
Okay. According to what we're doing, Carson City has approximately 24,464 existing residential units. At build-out, we will have 32,848 if all the things that we have on the books come to fruition, which leaves about 8,400 pieces of property to build out. They may be multifamily, they may be all kinds of things, but there's 8,400 of them. As we approach build out, it seems to me that increasing the number every year is the wrong approach. We ought to look at what's left, take a portion of that every year, and start to decrease that 8,400 to a number instead of increasing a number. In other words, if we think that beginning next year there is 8,400 possible build-out lots, and we do 400, then the next year there's not 84, there's 8,000. And if we use a percentage on that, then we're going to start to decrease the number of allocations instead of increasing the number, which seems like a much more viable approach than just saying we want 3% every year ad infinitum, because we're getting to the point where we don't have ad infinitum. We have a finite number now that we know we're going to eventually reach. So if we divide that out over 20 years, simplistically, that comes out to like 220 permits a year. If you take 2.5%, it's 210. If you take 3%, it's 420. I think we do ourselves a better favor by taking the number that's left instead of the number that was. And I would propose that we do something along the line of 2.5 or 3% of that, just so that we get a number at about 450 or 500 permits a year.
Madam Chair, what Commissioner Borders is referencing as sort of the foundation of his discussion is on page 4 of 11 of the staff report. My hesitation on that is that 8,384 additional residential units is based on a model that's based on the policies and regulations in place today. Those don't stay fixed. You'll recall we had a master plan annual report, and we looked at an area at the end of Betts and Roads, I think. I don't remember the street names. And that had just some weird zoning. I think it had some SF1A in there and some limited industrial. And we said, well, this should be medium density residential and the hillside should be low density residential. That's not in their model. That will go in their model by the end of the calendar year. We had a discussion during the workshop about the role of an accessory dwelling unit and the need for an accessory dwelling unit to obtain an allocation. And that would be the discussion we had in that workshop. Should that regulation change, I think would change the model. So, and then as things develop, you know, the number becomes more fixed as opposed to a hypothetical density. And that I'm less concerned about. I just don't want to lock into this number of 8,384 and think, okay, that's the finish line. Because it's not the finish line. It's the finish line today, but it might not be the finish line tomorrow. Because we're in a state of evolution where every year we're looking at our master plan. We had some commercial zoning, I think, over on Fairview, didn't we? And we said that should be medium density residential. So I appreciate the idea of looking at a different methodology. I don't have a quarrel with it. I just don't want to sign up for a number that's going to look like a finish line for 5 minutes and then it's not our finish line anymore.
Well, okay, but you can if you take the number of the maximum population of Carson City is 80,000 or so, which is what the demographer and everybody says is our build out number. You come back to the same thing, and I don't mind a moving number. I don't mind changing the ground rule every year. I just think we need to focus on what's left instead of what's here. And
Understood, and even the total build-out number changes because our household size is changing. We don't get that till every
Sure.
10 years. So I just don't want to mislead people into thinking, for example, okay, we have 8,400 units, that's all we have, guys, and we're going to
No, no,
build
no.
out in 10 years, and then it changes, and it changes, and it changes. So I guess my quarrel would be with that methodology, because I just think there's too many changing variables. That said, I'm totally good with a different methodology. I'm just saying that one I just have a quarrel with.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. You know, I remember we used to, 4 years ago, when we had this meeting every year, there would be nobody here. And now there's actually some interest, and that's really good to see in this because that's engages the community more. So mine are more ideas here, but I'm going to start with the one that Chuck threw out here on the maximum number of hookups. But I did have a question for you before I start down this path. So every year we set this number, and the previous year there were approvals of developments or new houses or residential things, and those are still on the books, right?
Right. What you're doing is you're not identifying how many lots get created or even what land can have an apartment complex. What you're doing is identifying how many building permits for residential use can be issued.
It's really just sewer and water hookups
No, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say how many building permits for residential
for
use.
residential. Okay, I got you. And then they will roll into the next year?
Nope.
They don't. So
They do not roll over.
okay,
They
that
die.
was, I needed to clarify that. So everything from last year that
Dies.
somebody didn't pull a permit on and for a water hookup or whatever and pay the fee, it goes away and they have to start again the next year.
Right. Our other communities have rollovers. We do not have rollovers.
Okay, good. So there's none on the books. This is it. So here are my 3 thoughts here after giving this much thought and reading through and listening to folks. I would prefer to go to a number of 2%. Okay, and that actually is, if you look at your number of 2%, I think it's 540 versus what it was before, right? And let's just look that so we're clear on it, because it's still significantly above what we're doing. 510, yeah, okay. And that maybe addresses some of the concern of some of the departments with regards to their ability to handle that additional growth, but still is above what we had for the last 2 years at least, because the only aberration year we had was when that one apartment complex pulled all of its permits that 1 year. Okay. Now here are my other 2 for digestion. Is that with regards to transportation and roads, which I know I have brought up numerous times because it's the one thing that we're in a deficit on here, and I know the city supervisors are working on that, is to, as we go through the year, look at areas of the city that have transportation capacity and try to focus some of these things in those areas project by project, because we're already doing that here, because we're asking for the streets guys to show us when somebody says, oh, I want to build, these houses over here, that we look at the road conditions too, right? And we say, oh, gee, the road's in good condition or bad condition. And I think that should be a factor, but not, a hard cast factor that says, oh, we have 5 zones in the city, so we're going to divvy these all up. I'm not projecting that. I'm just saying that we are sensitive to the transportation abilities of what we have for roads when we do look at large development. And I'm not saying that for small development, the landowner, that the 47%, I think it is, right? Because because they can go without coming to the planning commission and build a house. They don't need to come here. Now, here's my third one, and it is with regards to, you know, the affordability of housing. And I think we saw this a little bit in the school district, you know, and when you showed that one graph that said in 2012, the average home in Carson City sold for $145,000. And last year it sold for 500 and something. That's a 260% increase in a house over a 10-year period. So, you know, I've always believed that if you build more housing, you're doing the right thing, because, you know, you're adding to the stock of residential housing, because if you don't do that, then the price of housing is going to continue to go up because there's no supply side to the demand curve. And, you know, just stopping and saying no more residential building is going to exacerbate that. What we are lacking, and I think, you know, we've all seen this in the last maybe couple of years, we've built, you know, in this city, developers have built, we don't build them, right? We just go by the rules here and decide things. We're not building much in the way of what I would call starter homes. You know, most of the homes that are on the market right now are new ones are selling for $500,000 to $700,000. That's not a starter home. That's mainly people who are moving here from elsewhere, and it's not helping the teachers find a place, the policemen, the firemen. You know, the average per capita income of this town is $56,000 a year. And you can't buy a house, you know, here for that. So that's going to turn people away, and it's going to hurt our ability to attract those industries that this guy said, you know, gee, how can we get these guys to move here? Well, we've got a lot of light industry out there, you know, on Arrowhead, but if they sense that, well, gee, I don't have any young people coming up to staff my buildings, they're not going to locate here. And we are going to age and die as a community. We need some mechanism, and I know we all have struggled with this, and I know the supervisors have. So I'm just going to throw this out that I think, and I think it's appropriate at the Planning Commission, to look at some mechanism there of something that Heather educated me about a bit, called inclusionary housing, right? That's one means, which is kind of an overlay type of mechanism. And also, you know, tap into some state entities like the Nevada Housing Authority, you know, that you know, has funding for people who are of a certain income to buy their first home, and they can't be bought by speculators. Those kinds of things. I'm sure there are other ones out there to incent the building of some, you know, starter homes in this community. I know there's a lot of places that have been successful at that, and it's a struggle, but right now I don't feel like we have anything going on that, and we need to look at those things. So I'm asking, you know, that if the commission thinks this is appropriate, that we ask the planning department to research some of those things. And, you know, a lot of this is city supervisor decisions, but perhaps start coming up with some answers or some options or something. Because, you know, as the builders tell me, you know, they can't afford to take the risk of building affordable housing because you know, there's no profit in it. So how do we make that? How do we incent that, so to speak? So those were my three ideas. Thank you.
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, really quickly, I want to say thank you to all the city staff who came out to answer questions, even if you haven't come up to answer questions yet. I promise I won't call on you either. So I've said this before, and I know that there are those in this room who disagree with me, but communities are either growing or they are dying. And I think that we have to focus on the ability to control growth, and I think the 3% does a good job at doing that. Now, you know, to Commissioner Perry's point, I like to call it workforce housing. We need more of that here in Carson City, and it needs to be affordable. How do we do that? I'm going to throw out here, you know, maybe it is a 2% for general and development permitting, and then there's 1% set aside for if developers or individuals are going to build a home that is affordable. And Do I have a definition for that? No, but I think that that's something to consider. It would allow us to, 1/3 of the potential growth in our community in a year would be focused on that workforce housing. So it's an idea.
I think I'm going to have to go for this thing too on the affordable housing. I looked at the demographics basically from the 1950s till now. And part of the reason I looked at the 1950s till now, because that's where I've been here in Carson from the 1950s till now. All right, so what I looked at on there is in the mid 1970s, we had a huge increase in housing. We had a huge increase in population. One of the reasons that it actually showed that is because the fact is at that time, that was prior to Carson City actually doing the consolidation. And one of the reasons is they actually had availability for our FHA farm loan housing. So many people don't realize that Park Terrace was done all on FHA rural housing. That was one of the biggest developments that ever came into this area. That brought in workforce housing. It gave people the ability to come into this area. One of the problems we have as far as developing is that people don't want what we used to call the 235s, because the reason they called them 235s is they were $23,500. And they were 1,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 3/4 baths, and a single car garage. And that's not what the developers are building here. And that's not what people are saying they want. They're all saying we want to have nice houses. We want to have this. Well, right now, our housing is in the lowest when we're looking at the ceilings are 7.6, not the really high ceilings, are running right around 4.25. And then our new housing is going all the way up to $995,000. I'm looking at that going, that is insane. This is a situation where I'm hearing people say, well, we don't want to have apartments. Well, here's the thing. My son he makes probably close to 3 figures a year. He has 1 child. He's single. But at this point right now, he can only afford a home with a nice down for about $378,000. They don't have that in Carson City. And so what we've got here is they're moving out of the area. I think one of the things that we need to look at is that we've been looking at 6,000 square foot lots. I think one of the things that we might look at is cluster homes. We might look at single family cluster homes. We might look at 3,000 foot lots. I'm sure that that's something that a lot of people don't like. However, we only have so much land. We only have so many people to be here. And what we're hearing is everybody's hiring. Well, if there's no workers and there's no kids, then we are going to die. And I think that's something that needs to really be looked at, is that when I came here in Carson City, there was 4,000 people. Stewart Street was dirt. And there was a train. So, and I hear these people say, oh, gosh, I've been here 20 years, 30 years, and it's not what it was. Well, it wasn't what it was when I was a kid either. But when I was a kid here, too, there was no housing. We were living several families in apartments. We were living in trailers, trying to come into this area, trying to go ahead and build it up. So I look at this and say, we don't have the teachers. We don't have a lot of the state workers are not living here. The people from Incline that were the workforce housing have all left. They're coming down here. They're competing with the people for Carson. So unless we realize the fact that we are a community that needs to be sustainable, maybe go ahead and do some of the little tiny homes, do some of those things and look at this. And when I look at housing starts, I look at a number of housing starts. So if the number is 200 or 300 or 500, it's housing. That's where we can put a family. I don't care if it is multifamily. I don't care if it's cluster. I don't care if it's on a 12,000 square foot lot, but we need to bring in things that can actually come back and keep our community thriving instead of just being a bedroom community of Reno or of Incline. So anyway, Commissioner DeChristopher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am a believer in supply and demand. The thing that I think has happened here in Carson and many cities across our nation, we miss the point of what the demand is. And you've heard it, you've all articulated it very well, so I won't beat a dead horse. We do need to be more creative. I'll sign up for putting some hours in, but you know, with the legislative session coming to a conclusion, there was a lot of time spent on affordable housing bills. And there's things available out there that we can tap. And I don't know if that's in the city's purview. I don't know how we go about doing that, but I know that Nevada Housing is the right stop because that is where the demand is. And I do want to say, because I've heard this comment before where people are like, I love what Carson is. And I want to agree with the chairwoman. I came here in 72. And what scares me is the quality of life that was here then, that my parents chose to move us here, me and my two sisters. It's not the same town. We're growing old. And we not only need the workforce, we need the mix. So I do appreciate it when people say, I don't want to change this. I like it just the way it is. I want it to be for the young people coming in as well, because at the end of the day, I'm only going to be here so long, and I want this community to continue thriving. And when I think of what I heard from the agencies, yes, it's going to take some more money to support some growth. But that's going to be happening anyhow, because a lot of the expenses we have is not because of growth, it's because of aging. It's because of aging infrastructure. So I try to keep that in mind when I listen to the department heads speak about what the needs are. But I do hope, again, going back to supply and demand, that there is a way that we can make that happen. I also agree with going back to the 2%, only because when we look at where we at today, in fact, talking to Hope, not all the permits were used. Not all of them were pulled. We have seen a slowdown. We are coming out of COVID. I just feel more comfortable that we pump the brakes. I think the combination of that and meeting the demand for affordable housing will be on the right, continue on the right track. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Kilgore.
Commissioner Kilgore, for the record, I'm not often accused of being the pessimist, but I have a special type of pity for, and this isn't saying anything to the teachers and AJ himself, of course, but the education system has been in decline for 40 years, nonstop. It's constant and gradual, just going down every single year. Now to be with housing, yeah, we can bring in more housing, but you know, developers are the ones that build houses. And they build houses because they make lots of money building those houses. And you want to talk about the cost of houses, and well, let's look at apartments. Oh no, okay, that's right, because the mortgage of a $400,000 house is the same as renting a 3-bedroom apartment in this town. So no, building more apartments isn't helping families either when the cost of renting an apartment is the same as the mortgage for a $400,000 house. It's awfully close. We can, I mean, what is it? Within marginal $100, $200
No, probably $2,000 more for the house.
per month?
Yeah.
It's $4,000 to rent for a mortgage on a house every month?
Right now, and what we've got, yes, it's 7.25. Yeah. That's where we're at.
Okay. So I'm not here to argue with my colleagues, but I've done a fair amount of research buying and selling houses, not near as much as someone who's as educated in the field as you, obviously. But I'm a homeowner myself and have rented apartments around here as well. And the notion that we're going to somehow stimulate the market for affordable housing is nothing more than a fairy tale. And the only thing we can do to, I would say, like we've been saying, keep the community the way it is to slow down growth. The 3%, it seems exponential, and it is, and it cascades. and in which case it becomes unrealistic. After year to year, the 3% growth it's unsustainable. Not to say that people aren't going to keep paying the prices. That's not I don't think that that we're having trouble filling houses or apartments for that matter. But there will come a time when we do, because people have to be able to. The workforce has to exist, and it's a real issue right now. And maybe I don't want a $800,000 or $900,000 house, but maybe a $300,000 or $400,000 house would be nice. But even those don't exist here anymore. And once again, I wish I could be more optimistic. The fairy tale that the education system's going to get better or that housing's going to get better around here. Yeah, no, I've been watching it go the opposite way. I've only lived here 33 years, not as long as some. I've seen the way it's gone, and since 2012, it's gone the wrong direction. Luckily, I was early in and didn't have to pay these exuberant amounts of money for these custom-built homes that people are paying now. But like I said, the cost of the apartment living, it's not much better. So I don't see that, filling space with apartments, large 4 or 5 story apartments, 400 or 500 units is going to solve any problem at all when it comes to housing. It's certainly not when you look at what the median income is for the residents of this area. Typically making around 50,000, if that. People I know personally. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about how we can get developers to decide that they want to make less money, but I don't see it happening.
Commissioner Borders?
Our mission here is to decide how many allocations we're going to have next year. We talked a little bit earlier about streets and the condition of the streets in this town. The function of the condition of the streets is a function of the will of the Board of Supervisors and the public. It's not the function of the Planning Commission. The Board of Supervisors is the place where we decide if we're going to have affordable housing, if we're going to offer incentives, if we're going to try different approaches to attract people. This body doesn't get to do that. Now, all it takes to do those things is the will of the Board of Supervisors to make some of those decisions and to make some of those allocations. All we get to do is decide whether or not everything's following the code. We can, if we leave it at 3% and we have 700 permits authorized next year and we only issue 100 of them, like Hope says, they don't roll over, so what? If we do 2%, does anybody feel any better if we have 500 and we still don't use all of them? What the public is asking is a different approach. And I don't necessarily disagree with what the public is saying, but it's not this body. And having said that, I would go along with the 2% increase instead of 3%, Hope, since nobody likes my idea. And we'll progress on. But the community needs to know that the Board of Supervisors approves the budget. They can decide to spend $5 million a year on streets. They can decide to spend $25 million on streets and not do any gas tax raise or anything else. It has to do with what are the priorities of the community, and the only way the Board of Supervisors learns the priorities of the community is to hear from everybody in the community, not the half a dozen people that are always very vocal about it. You need to have a grassroots approach to trying to institute change, from streets to housing to affordable housing to all the things that we think everybody in this room kind of wants to do. But I don't think this body does it, and I don't think this is the place to do it anyway. So I'm off my soapbox.
Madam Chair, if I may. Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Now I'm going to get on my soapbox. How about, and I'm going to lobby you all, 2.5% with 1% dedicated to affordable housing.
A couple things, if I may. First of all, although we're sitting here, and I maybe was a little not clear, the two planners behind me, we take a lot of inquiries from people who contemplate developing in Carson City. They see that we have growth management. They see that we have a cap on growth. It's often a conversation. It's a big concern. So far, the conversation has been, well, no, the cap's at like 700. We never get near there. It will be fine. And so they maybe come in and start pursuing development in Carson City. But I don't want you to think that this is not something that's part of a discussion with people who are looking to develop in Carson City, because it absolutely is. Secondly, and it's been said, growth brings people, brings workers, it brings businesses. Businesses will say, how many rooftops did you build this year? Let me see if it's worth bringing my business here. And those are things that are positive for the community, and we all know that, and we see that. But we get those inquiries as well from the non-residential businesses who have those inquiries and want to know, what does it look like? What's my customer base going to look like? What's my workforce base going to look like? I think the conversation about affordability, I didn't see the connection initially, but now I kind of see it. And to me, it's not your average developer who's coming in to build affordable housing. It's an affordable housing developer. You saw it on the project on Roop. That group does affordable housing. They built the project over on Hot Springs. They're going after the federal money. They're going after a different pot of money than the other developers who are doing market rate. We are talking to Nevada Rural Housing Authority. We're frequently in conversations with them about, can they make this project work or that project work? So I actually think, if it sounds like you're not comfortable with 3%, but I thought that was a really creative idea, about 2% for market rate and then 1% if you're an affordable housing developer. And I understand what's affordable, but it is defined. And it does get the HUD money and the federal money. The board may not agree with you. And you don't get to make this decision. You're making a recommendation to the board. So do you get to decide if housing is affordable or not? No. Commissioner Borders is 100% right, not your decision. But if you are concerned that if we limit housing starts, we're going to compromise affordability, but oh wait, then we'll have this other bucket of allocations for the affordable group, I think that's a really creative solution, if that's where you want to take it. But I just wanted you to know that this is something that is, these numbers, they're not hitting the numbers, but when somebody contemplates investment in Carson City, they absolutely are aware that we have growth management. They're absolutely aware of what our allocation numbers are. They're reading the ordinance and they start asking us questions, and we get stumped because we only study growth management once a year. We're like, what? It says that? Okay. And we have to figure it out. So those are my comments. Thanks.
I'm happy to hear you say that, because I was going to go do that, because it is a mechanism of sending a message, right? And I actually like the 2%, 1% number there. 2% for, as you said, market rate, and 1% for an affordable housing developer, which sends the message that we do want that. It is desirable. It is probably the first step, from a policy standpoint, that we could recommend. And I know, as Chuck said, we don't get to decide that. We can only send the message that, hey, there's 520 market rate ones and there's 200 and something opportunities for an affordable housing developer, which maybe would send a message to those folks that this place is interested in that. So I would be very supportive of that 2%, 1%, as you said, and sticking with the 4357 and going to the 10,000 gallons per day, which is the other thing we haven't discussed.
Okay, I take back my 2.5% one. But I do agree with the 10,000 gallons a day as well. I am curious, so when a developer comes and talks to you and says, hey, I'm interested in building in Carson, if they build, and this is just your guesstimate, on average, how long do you think it takes for them to then actually submit an application? And I have a follow-up after you answer that.
It's not consistent. There are people who will call you, say, hey, I'm looking at this piece of dirt. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And I'm like, yeah, I think that can work. They're going to be in by end of week with an NPR conceptual map. They're going to be looking at the numbers, figuring out how quickly they can move, and they're not going to look back. You have other folks who run into issues. For example, Plateau just asked for another year because they need a traffic light on 50 and they're having trouble getting through NDOT. That doesn't mean they're not as aggressive as that other person, but that other person could get to the finish line more easily. So we definitely, one of my first observations in Carson City 6 years ago was we don't have people, I see very little in Carson City where somebody will get the entitlement and shop the project. Most people get the entitlement and build the project.
Now with so let's say they run into a problem before they're able to like actually build out. Have they already been allocated those?
No, they can't get their building permit till they have a final map, and they can't get a final map till they have their infrastructure either in or bonded for, which means they need the site improvement permit. So, yeah, they'd have to figure all that out before. That's why when Commissioner Perry was saying, oh, it's a water and sewer connection, I kept saying, no, it's a building permit.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I would be in favor of my original 2% and 1% because you might have a builder who's really interested in investing in the community, but if they hit hurdles that they have to cross, and then all of the permits are now out, and then they can't build that for that year.
I've been in construction here for 25 years. I've worked under as a subcontractor for 3 different contractors, 2 that went belly up during the recession. I've built multi-million-dollar houses, and believe me, I don't know who, that's the permits running out. It's just not a thing.
I think one of the things that confused me when I first joined the Planning Commission, and that's been like 6 years ago, it was that I thought that every time we issued a special use permit, that means that they were ready to go ahead and they were shovel ready and ready to go. And one of the things is we may approve it, but then they have their conditions of use. And there's other things. There's not just the conditions of use. There's also the economy. There's also demand. There's also financing that they're going to be able to get. There's the supply chain. And I look at so many places when I drive around Carson and say, okay, well, we approved a multifamily here. We approved a subdivision here. We did these things. But then they come back here and they say, our special use permit ran out because we were not able to go ahead and pull the trigger. So when I look at these things and realize that these building permits do not roll over, they are not consolidating. They're not going ahead and say we didn't build during COVID, and therefore now we have 1,200 building permits, and we're going to do it because we're looking at that level of the 80,000 or whatever. That's not the case here. But one of the things is I am very interested in this 2% and 1%. I think it's really important because what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing in Reno, and people don't even realize it, is that there is a lot of workforce housing that is actually determined on your income. And it might be somebody next door to you will be paying $2,200 a month and you'll be paying $800 a month. And those builders have actually gone for that type of a multifamily type of a thing in order to accommodate that. So I see this as an opportunity to go ahead and look at some of those type of builders that are coming in and saying, okay, great, we know you need a place for your workplace housing. You might not get stainless steel appliances. You might get the old white porcelain finish. You may not get the upgraded this. You may not get that in that particular building, but you have a place to live and something you can afford and something you can be proud of, instead of trying to figure out where to live, because right now we do not have the housing. So, Commissioner Cron.
So were you talking about in regards to purchase or
People are having a hard time qualifying at 7.25%. They just are having a heck of a time at it. And the down payments, and then I have seen something as a real estate agent that's making me absolutely crazy, and it makes me glad I do commercial instead of residential, is that when the lenders come in, they're saying, well, let's wrap your house, your credit card debt, your car payments, and everything into one thing. And I actually am looking at this in my crystal ball and have gone through the 70s, I went through the 80s, I went through the 2003s, I went through the 2008s. And I'm looking at this going, I don't think the lenders are doing anything non-predatory than they did before. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at as far as saying, okay, great, let's look at this and put people in housing. It may be rentals, but the thing is it's an interim and it's a stepping stone.
I'm ready to make a motion. I am. I don't know if the rest of us are. I just figured, let's give it a try and see what everybody says. All right. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the draft resolution with the following: a 2% growth rate for a 2% maximum growth rate for residential building permits, a 1% growth rate for workforce housing, and with a 10,000 gallon per day cap for a maximum average daily water usage for commercial and industrial building permits as a threshold for growth management.
Okay, can we have a discussion on that? I'm with you there 100%, but I think the terminology to the 2% for, I think Hope used it, market rate residential, and the 1% for affordable housing developers. And the other thing here is the 4357, and I just wanted to ask Hope, is that going to work with what we're proposing here? Because the 43 on the affordable housing really doesn't exist.
What we'll do is we'll extract it for the board resolution so that it shows 2%, 1%. What's going to happen is this starts the first of the calendar year, so it's January, February, March. Most of the housing starts are coming after that, and that's when they can be combined. So I think we'll be okay on that.
Okay. Would you accept those two changes then, just the terminology?
Yes, the language changes are fine.
Oh, one other question before we do that. The way this currently operates, after the 6-month period, everything rolls into the same pot. Are we going to leave the affordable housing units separate, or are we going to roll them into the pot?
As I understand the motion, they'll stay separate.
Okay, that would be my preference also, if that's, okay.
Was the seconder Commissioner Kilgore? Yeah,
Yes.
he's second, yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Aye.
What happened? We were talking.
Excuse me, is there any more public comment? I can't close it before an additional public comment. Anyone? No one? We'll see you at the Planning Commission in 5 minutes. Thanks. I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission for May 31st, 2023. And Tamara, can you give us another roll call?
Chair Preston,
Here.
Vice Chair Lloyd, Commissioner Borders, Commissioner De Christopher, Commissioner Kilgore,
Here.
Commissioner Cron, Commissioner Perry. A quorum's present.
Thank you. And I'd like to get an approval of the minutes of December 20th. Whoa, that's gross. So how about this one? How about possible approval of the minutes for April 26, 2023 and March 3rd, 2023? Oh, I'm sorry. It's a different one. God. How about public comment? Is there anyone that would like to come comment and discuss any topic that's relevant to or within the authority of this public body? Okay, seeing none, let's approve the minutes for the April 26th and March 3rd, 2023 meetings.
Madam Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of April 26, 2023 and March 3rd, 2023.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Perry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? There's quorum. All opposed. All approved. Going to meeting items, 13A, LU 2023-1049 for possible action, discussion, and possible action regarding a request from Daniel and Melanie Roop, applicant for a special use permit, SUP, to allow for the construction of a single guest building on property located within Schultz Ranch Pacific Plan Area Zone Single Family Residential, 6,000 square feet, located at 6887 Lookout Peak Drive, assessor's parcel number APN 010751-04. Heather.
Good evening, Heather Manzo for the record. So as you had mentioned, the property is located in the SF6 zone. When a guest building is requested, it is an accessory use to a single-family residence. In this case, the property contains a single-family residence, which is that primary use, and a guest building is allowed within the zone with the approval of a special use permit. So in terms of the guest building size, it is proposed to be 560 square feet in size and to be consistent with the primary residence. And it also complies with Carson City Municipal Code, and there are additional setback requirements, in particular within Shoals Ranch, as well as height limitations. And this request would comply with those standards as well. Staff received several phone calls from neighbors within the area with questions about the proposal, but nobody stated whether they were for or against. They mostly were just looking for information. Staff is recommending approval of the request at this time with the conditions outlined in the staff report, and the applicant is present to speak with the commission if you choose. That concludes my presentation, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. And does the board have any questions for Heather? Okay, I'd like to have the applicant come forward, please. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Borders.
Heather, the units at the back of the house, is there, I know that there's probably adequate parking, but is there any requirement to connect the new unit with the driveway or something like that?
So I did speak with engineering on this, and we looked through our standards. There is a requirement to provide one parking space for a guest building, and the applicant has shown that that space is being provided at the end of their driveway at the far end there. This is for one of their family members, and so when I asked, how does the resident get to the guest building? The answer was, well, of course, they're going to go through the house. But what we discussed is that there's got to be a way to get there from the outside as well. So from the parking space, there is a pathway that goes on the west side of the property past the storage shed and out to the back to the unit. So there's access provided and there is parking on site.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Was there anything you'd like to tell us about your permit?
I mean, I think she covered it pretty well. It's for my wife's mother.
Oh, okay.
So she's in her 70s. She's she's still doing well now, but she's looking to the point that she wants to plan so that she has some place where she knows she's with family. We don't have space in the house. We have 2 teenagers and a lot of stuff. And so this was the proposal, and she's excited about the opportunity to come here and live in the guest house. And theoretically, if she gets to the point that she needs more care, then we expect that we'll flip our teenage son, who by that point should be a young adult, and he'll be living in the little house in the back, and grandma would be living in his bedroom in the house, where we could, keep an eye on her or help her out if she needs any additional care.
Terrific. Now, have you read all of the requirements?
We did, all the conditions
name.
from the report, we did.
And do you agree to all those conditions?
We do.
Okay.
Oh, it was green, sorry, I guess I'm not close enough.
Okay.
Yeah, we agree with all the conditions.
And, okay.
And could you state your name for the record?
My name is Daniel Ropp, and my wife is Melanie Ropp.
Okay. And it looks like I have a question from Commissioner Cron.
Just real quick, I really like your project. I like the way where you've situated it in the backyard. You're away from your neighbors to the west. You've got some room with your neighbors to the east. Of course, those are all setback requirements that you had to deal with, but I just kind of like where it's located in the yard. So it feels good to me, I guess, for lack of a better term. It just kind of feels like it'll be a nice building in a good spot.
Thank you.
But I did have a question related to the architecture of the building. You're going to match your existing home, right?
Correct.
I just want that on the record.
Shingles matched, paint, stucco exterior, paint color the same, shingle color the same. I mean, we're working with the builder has told us he can match everything to be essentially identical to the existing house.
How are you planning to get your equipment into the backyard to build the home?
What he said is there's a possibility they'll have to take a panel or 2 of the fence down on the racetrack side, or when we had the patio poured, there's already a patio poured out there. If they have small enough equipment, they just took a panel off the side fence and drove in from the front yard.
Okay.
So depending on the size.
Yeah, just a word of caution on the racetrack side of the road. That landscaping is the common area landscaping for the development.
Right.
And the Parks and Recreation Department oversees the developments. The Homeowners Association pays for it, but the Parks and Recreation Department oversees it. And there are irrigation lines in there, and there are mature plant materials in there. So that would be something, I think, if you were to go that direction, you'd want to contact the Parks and Recreation Department to be sure that they were okay with that.
Sure, and I think more likely it would just be like for the concrete pour, which is what they did when they poured the patio, is they brought it from the back, but they didn't take their equipment in and out through there. So,
No.
but it's really nice back there. So we don't want to do anything to mess that up.
No, and I'm not speaking for the department. All I'm just giving you is a heads up. I just hate to have you get yourself into trouble with them if they started seeing you run across their landscaping and destroy their irrigation system. So
Thanks.
So it's a word of caution.
Commissioner Borders?
Did you consider attaching this to the house?
We did. The problem is the way our floor plan is laid out, our house has, our master suite, the primary suite extends in the back. And with the limitations of where we can put the house because of we have larger offsets than normal because we're on the outside border of the Schultz Ranch. So we have a 30-foot and a 20-foot setback or offset instead of the 10. So where we were able to put it and then keeping it from the actual closest neighbors, like I think it was Commissioner Perry talked about where we put it or, how we set it up. We'd have to basically extend from our primary bedroom, and we didn't think that was very good. Or we have to bring some hallway ray around it. It just, the idea of we even talked about, well, what if, couldn't we just add on to the house? And because of the available space and where we really had ability to put it, it didn't make any sense. So that's what
Were
we
you all
decided to
here
do.
earlier today at
For
2
the-
o'clock? At the discussion we had about auxiliary dwelling units?
No, we caught most of the growth management plan,
Okay.
but all I heard was somebody mention that you're going to have additional discussion about auxiliary dwelling
Well,
units.
we're also talking about changing the Title 18, which governs this, that says if you have a 6,000 square foot lot, you can't build an auxiliary dwelling unit unless it's attached. So you're not subject to that because it's not law yet, but you're close.
So that's the zoning for the 6,000 square foot
No,
lot or
it-
the actual size?
It's
of
about
the
lot size. So if I may just interject really quickly, this is over a half acre in size in terms of their lot size. So in that case, if it were
Okay.
implemented today, we'd still
All
be
right.
okay.
Okay, that's
good.
fine.
That's what I wanted.
Thank
'Cause
you.
we have a big lot, but
Yeah,
I
okay.
didn't know.
Yeah.
Her mom is at home right now, probably pacing the floor, waiting to hear back from us. So she's ready to go.
Yes, thanks for coming in, Daniel. So do you have a homeowners association out there?
We do.
And do you have CC&Rs?
We do, and we mailed them to the address they gave us. We mailed them our plan and told them we were doing this, and they said if we didn't hear, the CC&R say if you don't hear back within 45 days, assume you've been approved, and we've
Okay.
never heard back from them.
Okay,
So-
just wanted
No,
to
we're-
ask that
we-
question
we
because I didn't want you
sent
to
it
get
in
into
and-
trouble. We can't make that decision here on CC&Rs, but it's nice that you check that box.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, and I do want to say thank you for paying your taxes.
Are you ready for a motion? Do we have to see if there's anybody opposed first or that wants to comment? Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, I would, thank you. I move to approve special use permit LU 2023-0149 based on the ability to make all findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
Okay, 13B LU 2023-0148 for possible action and possible discussion and possible action regarding a request from the Carson City Airport for a special use permit, Carson City Airport applicant for a special use permit SUP to allow for the construction of a snow removal equipment storage building on property zone public regional PR located at 3420 College Parkway, assessors number APN 005-01105. Heather.
Heather Ferris for the record. The subject parcel is approximately 4.76 acres in size and is located on the north side of College Parkway, south of the taxiway on the Carson City Airport property. The parcel is zoned public regional. The airport is proposing to construct a new 3,200 square foot metal snow removal equipment storage building in the westernmost portion of the parcel. The building will also include a small office and restroom, and the design of the building will be in keeping with other buildings which are located on the airport property. Per municipal code 18.04.185, the use may only be established in the public regional zoning district subject to first obtaining a special use permit. The Planning Commission is authorized to approve a special use permit upon making all 7 findings in the affirmative. Staff has made all 7 findings and is recommending approval subject to the 7 conditions of approval, which are included in the staff report. We have not received any public comments regarding this project. Representatives for the project are here and may wish to speak on behalf of the project, and I'm available for questions.
Okay. Any questions of the board? No? Okay, and you're the applicants?
My name's Steve Takis. I'm the airport counsel for the Carson City Airport Authority. I've been doing that for about 30 years now, so that explains my white hair probably, or the lack of hair that I have more. But we're totally good with, and we're requesting approval of the special use permit. There's one condition that was added that we cannot comply with. It doesn't make sense to us, and we can't legally comply with it, and that is the extension of the water main out in the street. It's not being extended for the purpose of this project. We're familiar with the Carson City Municipal Code section, or Article 12, that says when a developer comes in and develops a parcel and there's a water main out in front, the developer extends the water main to the next property border, so that you constantly have water mains being extended. My guess is Public Works put that condition in somewhat mechanically. They saw construction of a building going on, and they said, go ahead and extend that water main. Here's the problem. The problem is that it's not on the airport, and the airport is not legally permitted to spend money off the airport. So if somebody else wanted to fund it and build it, we're all for it, and we'd support them in any way we can, but we're not allowed to spend money on it. In the report, you'll see that this is one project that is not qualified for an FAA grant. They refer to FAA AIP grant, Airport Improvement Program grants. A large amount of the money that we get at the airport to support the airport here in Carson City is federal grants. The federal government, the FAA, administers a grant program in which we pay approximately 6% of every project that they approve on the airport, and the feds kick in the other 94%. So it's a very attractive arrangement. We typically get about $1 million a year from those grants. Some years, like when we rebuilt our runway, we got $13 million. So it fluctuates. But whenever we receive that money, and the money is jointly received by Carson City and the airport, when we receive that money, both the airport and Carson City give assurances to the FAA that we will comply with a set of conditions they have. And one of the conditions is that we can't spend money that is raised on the airport off the airport. It's a limitation. It's a limitation in the federal law, and so the FAA puts it in the assurances. So if it includes this requirement that we need to build a water main out in the street or extend a water main out in the street that doesn't serve us, that has, it just happens to be in front of us, but it's not going to be used for this project. If you do that, or if that's what the outcome is, it's essentially the same as denying the special use permit, which is kind of crazy because we're building a garage to store our snowplows. I mean, this is not really anything other than that, and it's something that the airport needs. And so we're asking that you approve the special use permit, but without that one requirement that we extend the water main. With me also is Nadine Burgard, who is with Armstrong Consulting, which is our contract engineers, and she's here and can answer any engineering questions that you might have or any project-specific questions. And of course, I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have as well.
Okay, bring this back to Stephen.
Stephen Pote, Development Engineering for the record. So yes, the requirement for water main extensions, I think a lot of the commission is familiar with those. That was not an arbitrary or mechanical decision. We did look at it, and I think we also decreased the extents of the water main extension, since there's really only one parcel that would benefit from that. And the code doesn't require it to be somebody who's benefiting or using the water main for the extension. That being said, I appreciate the airport's position in terms of not being able to use funds off-site. So this is the first that we've heard this discussion. So I think it might be beneficial for us to have some time to sit down with them and look at what those regulations are and what they say, and maybe come back either without that or maybe add changes to it if that's acceptable to the commission and to the applicant.
But we're amenable to that. We have historically always worked with the city as a partner through every one of our projects, and we're always interested in doing that.
Okay, so how do we go about just tabling this?
Motion to table.
Motion to table?
If I can just ask, Stephen, could we modify condition 6 to say to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director prior to issuance of? And that way, if the Public Works Director were to find through the DA's office that this couldn't be lawfully implemented, he can just make that decision. They don't have to come back.
Yeah, that would be acceptable to us as long as it's acceptable to the applicant.
Yeah, that's acceptable to us, certainly.
That's fine. Just real quick, Steve, just how does this work with your master plan for the whole airport? You've went through a master plan process not too long ago, correct?
Yes, we did, and this is part of the master plan. The
So
master.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is part of the master plan. That's really.
So the location and kind of as you laid out during the master plan process, this is implementation of that plan, this
Correct.
location.
Correct. There is something unique about the location. That location is on a very kind of a narrow triangular piece of property on the airport, which we acquired from the BLM with certain restrictions. And one of the restrictions is we can use it for things like a garage for snowplow equipment. We can't rent it out to somebody who wants to build hangars and rent them out for money. So it's kind of ideally suited, and that's one of the reasons it was placed there.
Okay. No, that's fine. I was just curious. I knew you'd, what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you did a master plan for the airport?
We did it with Kaufman and Associates, and it was 3 or 4 years ago. Honestly, I lose track. I've been through probably 7 master plans at the airport, and they get better and better. This last one was well done, yeah.
Right. And then just for the record, you're planning on matching the other architectural buildings out there. That's what it implies by your elevations. I just wanted you to put that on the record.
Yes. Yes, we are, and yes, we are.
No further questions.
Yeah, what was I gonna say? It was important. Oh, Heather, we looked at a special use permit not very long ago where we moved the weather station to the other corner of this lot? Was that-
Right, and that has not been completed thus far, correct? That's what the AWAS tower has not been relocated to the east corner of the property, according to our records.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is, when we approved that special use permit, why didn't the water main issue come up then?
Stephen Pote for the record. So the code section that requires water main extensions is pretty all-encompassing. It's any new construction or remodel, and remodel is not defined. So obviously there are situations where there might be some changes to a property that are small and don't warrant triggering those improvements. So it is a little bit subjective, determining when that should be applied, which is why we felt it prudent to make it a condition of approval rather than just relying on the development standards there. So
No,
to answer your question, it's a little bit subjective. When they were doing the radio tower,
Yeah.
we felt like it was a small enough project. There was an existing tower that shouldn't trigger it.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that too, it's on. The relocation of that tower is not, sorry? Oh, Nadine Burgard, sorry. The relocation of the tower is not, maybe this is why it's not considered new development, because it was removal of a structure. It wasn't from that area and then moving it to a different part of the airport. That's not on that parcel.
Oh, I thought we moved it to the corner.
Or is it, it might still be
Yeah,
on
it was,
the very corner
it was
of the
moved
parcel?
to the corner, the easternmost corner
Yeah.
of
Okay,
that
so
property,
maybe
yeah.
that might be part of it, is that in that area, there wasn't technically new construction, it was moving a structure, an existing structure?
Well, but according to what Steven said, if it's a remodel, it probably should have triggered it before, but they chose not to. So I think Hope's suggestion is probably a good idea.
Any further discussion? Okay, bring it for public comment. Seeing none. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Commissioner Borders.
Wait a minute, let me find it. I move to approve LU 2023-0148 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval in the staff report with the amendment of recommendation number 6 to include.
The condition 6 will begin to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director, comma, and then go on with the existing text, which says prior to issuance of a building permit, and so on and so forth.
What she said.
Looking for a second? Okay, Commissioner Lloyd seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And the applicant did on the record say that that was acceptable.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And I'm going to stick around for the next two items because they involve the airport. And if you have any questions regarding what the airport authority has done or hasn't done, I'll be here to answer questions on that.
Thank you. Okay. 13C, LU 2023-0150 for possible action and discussion and possible action regarding a request from Carson Tahoe Executive LLC, applicant for a special use permit, SUP, to allow for the construction of fuel storage facility on property zone Public Regional PR located at 2640 College Parkway, assessors number APN 005011-83. Heather.
Heather Ferris again for the record. The subject property is a lease parcel approximately 1 acre in size and is located north of College Parkway and south of the taxiway on the Carson City Airport property. The applicant is proposing the construction of a new fuel storage facility, including a 12,000-gallon tank for storage of AV gas and a 20,000-gallon tank for the storage of Jet A fuel to help serve the aviation community. The tanks that will be installed are designed to be bulletproof, auto crash proof, and fire rated. Fuel will be transferred from the tanks to a fuel truck, and fuel trucks will then fill the airplanes. The facility has also been designed with secondary containment in the event of a spill. In talking with the Environmental Control Agency, because the fuel tanks are double-walled and protected by bollards, additional containment would not be required. However, as designed, there will be a 10,000-gallon secondary containment area. Per Municipal Code 18.04.185, the use may only be established or modified in the public regional zoning district subject to first obtaining a special use permit. The Planning Commission is authorized to approve a special use permit upon making all 7 findings in the affirmative. Staff has made all findings and is recommending approval subject to 4 conditions of approval, which are included in your staff report. We have received 3 written public comments, which have been included in your packet. And representatives for the project are here and may wish to speak. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Yes, can the applicant come forward, please? Okay. Hi. Have you read the conditions of use? And do you accept those conditions of use?
I have and I do.
Okay. And does anyone on the board have any questions? Commissioner Borders?
Heather, you and I talked earlier about that secondary containment, and you saying that height of containment of 10,000 gallons is sufficient?
I'm saying that the Environmental Control Agency has indicated that
That's
secondary containment is not required
Okay.
because it is a double-walled tank and protected by bollards. However, as designed and as proposed, it will have the 10,000-gallon secondary
Okay.
containment.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Commissioner Lloyd?
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, Heather, we probably don't have aviation fuel near residential communities such as the mobile home park across the street. But where, are there any other areas with large fuel storage above ground near residential in Carson City?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and Commissioner Cron?
Yeah, a couple of questions. First, for the applicant. In your application, you indicate that the hours of operation are during daylight hours and there'll be no additional lighting in the area. You also indicate that there will be screening from College Parkway, about 75 feet of 6-foot visual barrier. Based on finding 2, would you be willing to have an additional condition added to your permit stating those things?
Yes, we would. And for the record, my name is Brad Cost, and I am the COO of Stellar Aviation.
Bruce Carrod, Carson Tahoe Executive.
Also, gentlemen, I do appreciate your documentation you put together. I thought it was very clear, at least from my perspective, as what you were offering and what you were providing. So thank you for that. I did have one question for Mr. Steve Takis, if he had a second. Again, it goes back to the whole master plan thing. Why, kind of going off my fellow commissioners' questions, you know, having this large a fuel tank near a residential area, how did that fit into the master plan as far as fueling planes and being located where it's at? How does that work with the master plan?
The fueling of planes is not going to happen at the fuel storage tank. The way it's been designed by Stellar and Carson Tower Executive is that's their storage facility. They fill a truck. They drive the truck to the airplanes. However, there still are tanks that are relatively close to College Parkway, and there is a mobile home development directly across the street. We did look at that at the Airport Authority. It meets all the safety criteria the FAA prescribes, and we don't really see an issue with that, particularly given the type of tanks that are being put in. These double-wall tanks, as Heather mentioned, they're ballistic. You can drive a vehicle into one of those tanks and it will not ignite or explode. So they're a relatively safe thing to have around people. So we did look at that.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner DeChristopher?
Thank you. Yeah, my question was, and it goes back to the master plan, was there, knowing there's concern and that it appears this is one of a kind, that we're putting this above ground storage next to a residential area, was there any consideration of putting it in another location within the airport? You know, it would probably be you. I just realized that that's going to be your scope.
Okay, so many years ago, even before I was involved in the Airport Authority, the city approved a lease for a fixed base operator, somebody to operate an aviation business at that location. Throughout the years, that lease has been renewed, it's been transferred from one provider to another, and it's that lease that was approved by the city that gives them the right to put a fuel facility there. And that's existed, like I said, before I got involved with the Airport Authority in 1989 when the Airport Authority was first formed. And so that's why it's in that location. There are a limited number of locations on the airport where you can put fuel facilities. We currently have above-ground tanks in 2 other locations on the airport. We've eliminated all the underground tanks because the underground tanks that we had out there were the single-walled kind that the environmental folks say you got to get them out of there because if they leak, we won't know. So that's why it's there, because that's the only place they can really put it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And when I drove out there just to get a feel, I thought, well, the fire department's right there too. That made me feel better. No. Thanks.
Commissioner Lloyd, please.
And this is for, I don't remember your first name, but Brad. So what do you do for fuel now, currently?
We are not currently in the fuel business at the airport right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask a question.
And Commissioner Perry?
So when you fill one of these tanks, how do they vent? Is there some kind of a scrubbing system so that you don't have gas fumes going across the road? I mean, when you have a tanker come in to fill the tanks, how does it vent? How does the tank vent?
Well, there is vapor recovery on the actual trucks that come in and do the deliveries. So that takes care of the vapor situation you talked about during a delivery. And then there is a natural vent system that's on the tanks themselves. So there is going to be some type of an emulsion, if you will, as far as fumes go, but it's not anything that, I don't foresee it as anything that would be noticeable.
So there's vapor recovery on the truck. So when he
Right.
comes and fills it, he actually is the one that recovers
Right.
the vapor from the tank that is being filled.
Being filled.
Okay, thanks.
Hopefully I did a good job of answering. It's a pretty technical question, but. Vapor recovery was the key word. Yes. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Public comment? Seeing none, bring it back to the board for a vote. Would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move to approve LU-2023-0150 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval included in the staff report, including condition 5, which includes hours of operation are during daylight hours only, and there'll be no additional lighting added in the area, and that there'll be screening from College Boulevard, approximately 75 feet of 6-foot visual barrier.
Second?
Okay, all approved? I mean, okay, it was Kilgore. And, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
You're welcome.
Chair.
Okay, and next is 13D, LU 2023-151 for possible action and discussion and possible action regarding a request from Arrowhead Tenant LLC applicant for a special use permit to allow for the construction of 3 hangars on leased parcels at the Carson City Airport Zone Public Regional PR located at 2600 College Parkway. Assessor's parcel number APN 005021-14 through 15 and 116 located within APN 005100-10-01. Heather.
Good evening again. For the record, Heather Manzo. So this request is located internal to the airport site. Although it's got an address off of College Parkway, it's actually accessed off of Arrowhead Drive. And as shown here, it's essentially at the intersection of two runways within the airport property. The immediately adjacent property to the west, you'll see many airport hangars similar to what the applicant is proposing to install at this location. The applicant is proposing architecture as well as site design very consistent with other hangar sites within the airport facility where there isn't immediately adjacent public right-of-way or frontage that can be viewed, where the public can view the site from the public right-of-way, excuse me. So the proposed elevations, as I mentioned, are consistent with existing development on the site. Conditions of approval will establish the minimum setbacks while not prohibiting the placement of the buildings within the site. So we're just establishing minimum setbacks since the public regional zone does not have setbacks. The special use permit will establish those. And then a condition is also recommended to limit major on-site maintenance and repairs that would include hazardous or flammable materials. That condition came from the fire department, and the applicant had some questions about what that meant, because it is typical of all folks who have hangars on the site to do minor repairs and maintenance to the planes on site rather than having them hauled off. So the fire department did confirm that the condition is accurate the way that it's stated and would allow for minor repairs that are consistent with a normal garage of an airplane type use. And then Karen is here with Manhard if you have any questions for her. So staff is recommending approval of the request. I do think that we received a general public comment that went out with the staff report. It didn't really say what project it was pertaining to, but because this site doesn't really generate any traffic on College Parkway and is really internal, there aren't really any impacts to the surrounding area of the airport really at all. So those were included with the staff report, but staff doesn't have any noted concerns related to that. So staff was able to make the findings and is recommending approval. And I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Karen.
Good evening. I'm Karen Downs with Manhard Consulting, for the record, representing the applicant. I do have a presentation tonight if you'd like to hear it, or if I can just answer questions if you prefer that as well.
I'm going to defer to Commissioner Borders.
Thank you. You have a lease for the land, is that correct?
Yes, sir. The lease was approved by both the Airport Authority and
Yeah,
the Board of
I
Supervisors.
saw the minutes, but I just wanted to make sure that you don't own the land, you're just going to build the buildings.
That's correct. It's a lease agreement.
Do they revert back to the airport after 25 years, 30 years, or whatever?
Let me jump in. Steve Takis, Airport Council. Yes, the leases provide that after 50 years, and we have 50-year leases so they can fully amortize their investment. We want them to build nice stuff out there. At the end of 50 years, we as the airport have the option to either take possession of the buildings or make them remove the buildings and return it to its native state.
Do you have the option to release it to them also? So you either take it or tear it down?
Take it or tear it down. Yeah, there would be no way to release it to them if the lease expires, because the lease is for the ground area for them to build the hangar. So if the lease
I
expires.
was just suggesting that after 50 years, maybe they want another 25.
Oh, there are some provisions in Nevada law, and we've used them before to extend some of these leases.
Okay.
Those extension laws are very strict for full-service FBOs, but for the project that they're building, it's for aircraft storage only, and as Heather pointed out, minor maintenance is allowed. But it's aircraft storage only is really the type of hangar it is, and the law allows us to extend those. And we have done it for other tenants on the airport.
And I guess my assumption is that the developer or the builder is well aware of all these requirements and is fine with them. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Commissioner Lloyd, for the record, Can either of you give me, this is just to get an idea of the actual size of the buildings. What size or what kind of plane would fit in a 10,000 square foot hangar?
These are designed for relatively, I guess, small to medium-sized business jets. Actually, the hangars are 2 different or 3 different sizes. I think they're 2 different sizes. 2 are the same, and 1 is slightly smaller. So ordinarily, they'd be used for a business jet or maybe a combination of general aviation aircraft. We've got a bunch of hangars that are about the same size that have 4 or 5 regular airplanes like I have, a single engine airplane in them.
Commissioner Cron?
Yeah, sound like a broken record, but I was curious about the master plan related to this as well. So why these locations, why these 3 in that location?
Okay, so the master plan actually provides for this entire strip next to this taxiway Bravo, which is where it is, to be developed into hangars. We also have the master plan allows the middle of the triangle, so there's a runway and there's 2 taxiways that make a triangle out of the area. The unbuilt area in the center of the triangle is also available and designed in our master plan for aircraft storage hangars. And so these folks chose this location probably because it's right near the existing self-service fuel island. It's very close to the runway. If I were picking a spot on the airport, this would probably be the next best spot to pick. And so I think that's why they picked this one.
And then the buildings are going to, again, just reflect the architecture that's out there from what I've seen on the elevations as well as my visit out there.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, and that's correct. We actually have building standards attached to the lease. And so pretty much every hangar you see out there is going to be blue or light brown, and they're all going to look pretty much the same.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, public comment? Seeing none? Bring it back for a vote. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'll move to approve special use permit LU 2023-0151 based on the ability to make all the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. And staff reports.
Right now, we have a light agenda for you for next month. We have 2 abandonments, right-of-way abandonments.
Have
I
what?
know. So, we may see how time-sensitive those are, I'm not sure. Or, I was just thinking if I could add any other stuff, but as I think about it, it's more controversial, so we'll figure it out. So you'll either have a light meeting or a pretty big one. But right now, we only have 2 right-of-way abandonments for you.
Hope.
So that was the cliffhanger? Is that it? Commissioner Crowd?
Madam Chair, I don't know what the protocol is, but I will not be at the next Planning Commission meeting in June. So I don't know, is there a protocol? Do I have to give up my dog? What do I need? What's?
Bring presents.
No, so that we can make sure we have a quorum.
Sorry, say that again, Hope.
No, so we can make sure we have a quorum.
Yeah.
You have to leave your driver's license here with us.
Okay. That is a unique way. Commissioner Perry.
Yeah, I might as well disclose that I'm going to have the same problem in July, as I'll be fishing in Alaska.
It's just.
But Hope, I had a question for you. Since I was out looking at this thing in the airport, I turned off there because it's like you can't stop in the middle of the road there and just look at these things. So what's the status of that subdivision that we approved on Nye Lane that's across from the airport that looked like it was going to be affordable housing?
Mobile homes.
I don't think we've ever seen that. Have you seen it, Stephen?
There is a developer, they're working with a local engineer, and it sounds like they're interested in trying to move forward.
But they haven't
It's-
submitted yet, right?
They have not submitted yet. It's their first time, so.
And it was manufactured homes, right?
No, I think it was single family.
I think it might have been modulars, though.
Yeah, modulars.
Mhm.
Yeah, modulars, but on bigger lots. Yeah. Damn U-shapes. Okay, anything else? Any public comment? Okay. Any commissioner reports or other comments? Nothing else? Nope.
I guess I'll just mention while it's fresh in your mind, but not at this meeting. Let me know on growth management, the formatting. I think it's good having Eddie and Andy. I thought it was great having AJ, but I'd like to know what's beneficial to you and if I should be inviting more speakers. So you don't have to tell me right now. You can just tell me when you see
Well, I
me.
want to thank you very much for Andy because that looking at the sewer lines was really, really nice. And to see that one area, because we only had the two areas that really showed the congestion, but to find out it actually had to do with volume, that was huge. So that was really nice. And finding out about the different things that are going with water. I think the one thing that I would like to see in the future is I'd like to see timelines on things like where we're pushing in the road for Ormsby, the final stuff on Quill. I mean, some of these other, there's a couple of different things that have been in progress that our developments address them, but they're coming down the line later. And that's, I'd really like to see a timeline on that type of stuff.
And I would like to add, like, I know, like, Jen was here, but then I think she had to go. But I would have liked to talk to her a little bit about park planning.
Okay, I'll throw in one too. I thought that the sheriff's report was really good. I mean, the statistics and facts and so forth that they put into that is very thoughtful in helping to understand it. I'd really like to see something similar out of the fire department because that one was like 2 paragraphs with no numbers.
And though I know it's not required, like the library also has all that information. And so I think that asking other departments that may be impacted in ways we don't necessarily connect with the code might be helpful.
The only thing I would thought or add to that is that just a little more time, because if we had these speakers, they went a little, I mean, I appreciated everything they said, but they took up some time. And so when you kind of get to the end of the 3, you know, we were past our hour and a half. And so I just say a little extra time next time when we bring in speakers like this, give us a little extra time so we don't feel rushed at the end and people are backing up. What's that?
Yeah.
Oh.
I said I didn't expect it to go so long.
Well, I thought it was great information. I'm not at all being critical of what we got. It's just that we ended up kind of backing up on the public that came in at certain times, and you know that would be just nice to give the speakers a little more time.
I'll talk to them. Okay.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Yes.
Aye.